I never believed in folklore or myths before, but something that happened to me recently has made me a believer. Last month, my friend and I went to visit his grandma's lake house because the weather was nice that weekend. She wanted us to pick up a few things that she needed from there. So, one Saturday morning, we headed there, and we were going to stay there for a few hours and have some drinks before going back to the city and giving the things to his grandmother. It was a beautiful sunny day, and when we got there, it was really quite beautiful. There was nobody around for miles, and we enjoyed our peace and quiet. Somehow, the weather was beginning to change, and it seemed like it was going to start raining. We went inside for a little while, waited for it to clear up. In the back of the house, we found his old bikes and went for a ride. There is a trail through the woods, and we took it to ride a bit. The weather was changeable the entire time, and we decided to head back after about an hour and a half before it began raining again. It started raining just as we got back inside the house. Now, there's a big window in the house, and I decided to sit in front of it for a while. But as soon as I got there, I saw something next to our car. It looked like a dog but was much bigger, standing on all fours. It seemed to be hiding behind the car. I called Mike immediately to see what it was, if he could recognize it. But when he got there, he panicked, got extremely scared and called the police. He said his grandmother used to scare him with stories about the dogman, so that way, he would behave. The creature looked exactly like one of those. When the creature noticed us, it began walking towards us and looked like it would go right through the window. It was speeding up, and I literally saw my life flashing in front of my eyes. Mike and I were both paralyzed in fear, just standing there not knowing what to do. At the last moment, right before going through the glass, the creature stopped in its tracks, turned around, as if it had heard something calling out to it. Neither one of us had heard anything, so it must have had a heightened sense or something. As it walked away, we were looking at it in shock and could not believe what had happened. The police arrived a few moments later, and we told them what had happened. They were skeptical at first and did not believe us, but they did the search through the woods and did not find anything. I'm so terrified of what is out there and how many myths and legends are actually real. This happened to me when I was still living in Georgia. I was hanging out with my mom and my sister on the back porch, drinking and watching the stars, the same way we did every Friday. Saturday would be dedicated to chores, and Sunday was all about the Lord. So Friday was the day we did whatever we wanted to, for as long as we wanted. After Ma hit the hay, it was Mary Ann who had not gone to bed. She'd been the one to pull out her phone and show me directions. Darien River was only about 20 minutes out, and she would not take no for an answer. I tried everything to convince her to stay in, but in the end, she'd been impossible to dissuade. She'd have gone alone if I didn't agree, and she'd already had too much to drink. So, I crept into the house and took my dad's truck keys. I tried twice more to discourage her, but in the end, I was overruled. There was no reason to go up to the river this late, and I complained the entire way. After all, I knew why she wanted to go. Mary Ann was a monster hunter through and through. Her and her friends were always running around the abandoned rice fields, looking for a hint of something that did not exist. It was irritating at best, and there was nothing but other monster hunter weirdos hanging out at the river. Mary Ann said I was no fun, said that I didn't care. There were a million things I'd rather be doing, and yet I was stuck with her, driving 20 minutes out. I was not listening as she read out loud by Alti. By the time we reached the river, I was no wiser about her nonsense than I was when we left. We stopped the car a good ways off from the river, and she was gone before I could try and dissuade her. So, I followed with my beer and my flashlight. There were dozens of boats lining the dock, but nothing stopping Mary from rushing to the bank with her phone and sticking her face in the water. More than once, I thought about kicking her in the butt, but I didn't want to be the one explaining to my dad why his seats were soaked tomorrow when he was on his way into town. We were there for little hours, and I was getting tired, but Mary kept insisting that she needed one more moment, so I entertained myself with my phone. Even though the signal was spotty, I'd rather watch glitching videos than watch Mary stare into the murky water for another hour. When she shrieked, however, I was at her side in a moment. But something went wrong, and she was underwater before I could reach her. The water was too dark to peer into, and the bubbles stopped too quickly for me to track where she'd gone. There was no movement, no way to track her at all, and I waited at the edge, hoping she'd come up on her own. She did not. I wanted to go in after her. I warned her this was a bad idea. Now I was going to have to be cold with her, and I fished her out of the dirty water. I thought about leaving her behind, but if there was one thing Dad loved more than his truck, it was his daughter. So I took my shoes off and got ready to wade in the water. Lucky for me, Mary Ann popped up before I could get more than an ankle deep, grinning like a moron as she shoved her waterlogged phone into my face. The only thing on the screen was something dark and slithering, like a river snake. It was impossible to keep from knocking her phone into the dirt. I had not exactly explained that I'd been worried about her. Instead, I laid into her that night. I told her exactly what I thought of her and her stupid monster hunting. Warned her that I'd be telling Dad of everything when we got home. She did not say another word to me on our way home, but I did hear her screaming over her poorly captured footage of Alti. She claimed he was beautiful and worth having to deal with her dipwad brother. But I was there. There had been nothing there. No silver sheen, no large fins. So I guess all there's left to figure out is if anybody else in Georgia has ever seen this thing. I want to prove her wrong so badly, but with the way she talks about it, I'm beginning not to trust my own account. Had it been there and I just missed it? Or is she just crazy? Last year, I had something happen to me that changed the way I look at things and the world. It made me scared to go out alone at night, even in the safest places or sometimes even if I'm with someone. I really love to travel, so when my friend called me to visit a natural park near our town, I could not wait, accepting right away, obviously. The ride was kind of long. It actually took us about 2 hours to get there. We went during the day so we could explore, and it was a great time, until it was time to head back. It got dark early, and the drive was really long, so we were a bit exhausted. There was nothing on the road, as we were passing the mountains, and it seemed like we were driving for 5 hours. At one point, the road was a straight line, and that's when I noticed something on the ground in front of us. It was a dead deer. We both felt kind of sick after seeing it. We parked our car near it and decided to report it. As I called the service, I noticed something heading our way. It was huge and I had never seen anything like it, so I ran into the car as soon as I could, and I told Mary to get in the car quickly. I decided to stay in the car for a minute to see it get closer, to see if I knew what it was. As it was getting closer and closer, chills came all over my body, and I was shocked from what I was seeing. It was a dog-like creature, but much bigger, and it was terrifying. It walked on 2 legs, and at first, it seemed to me that it was a man disguised in a dog costume or something. But if it was, it had to have been the tallest man in the world. I started the car and drove off. In the mirror, I saw it. It stopped by the dead deer, and it slunched over like it was going to feed on it. That's when I looked away. I did not want to have that carved into my brain as well. It was easily the scariest thing I had ever seen, and Mary, was just as shocked as I was. We didn't know what to make of it, and tried to rationalize it but could not. We Googled what we saw and found many articles and stories about a thing called a dogman. I had not heard of it before. I'm literally scared to walk around my city because God knows what else is lurking out there. Mary and I told the police what happened, and that we called services to check out the deer on the road, but nothing was ever found in the place we saw it. To be honest, I didn't expect it to still be there when people arrived anyway. That's not how the world works, but then, what do I even know anyway? My sense of reality is definitely gone. My sister claims that she saw mermaids on her way to the Caribbean. She and my mother went on a cruise a few months back, and they both swore up and down that there were people swimming alongside the boat, which makes no sense. Boats are usually going like 20 miles an hour. When I asked how they knew it was a mermaid and not somebody just deep-sea diving in a nearby boat, they both said the same thing, that they saw their fishtails. They were fat and dark-skinned, and they couldn't quite make out other facial features, but my mother said she felt threatened the entire time, like they were waiting for somebody to lean over too far. My mother even had a picture, but it was too dark to make out. The flash reflected in blues and purples off of something in the water, and it could almost make out an arm on the photo. But power of suggestion can be ridiculous. I don't know. It seems absurd, but is it really? The ocean is 95% undiscovered, so I guess nothing is impossible, especially after 2020. I'd figured I'd just put it out there and see what you all thought about it. I'm 49 years old, a woman, and from Morgan County, Georgia. I live alone with my dogs, whom I found by the road on Route 278 when I was driving home from visiting a couple of friends at their farm. My dogs grew beautifully and turned out to be quite big, at least 40 to 50 pounds. According to the veterinarian, one at least is half Rottweiler. I don't know who abandoned them, but I know breeders who just dump pups as if they're not pure or something weird like that. And just to make things clear, I'm a non-believer. I find myself to be a rational person. Ghosts, aliens, and cryptids are not entities I believe in. If anything, I believed cryptid to be a term used for intelligent stuff until my 13-year-old nephew showed me some videos about urban legends and the likes. I believe everything has a logical explanation. Sometimes, we just lack the proper resources to access it. I live in a house by the road, and I make a living by working as a receptionist in the motel area near outside of town. The strangest thing you'll ever find there are drug addicts or respectable neighbors on love affairs. Nothing of the paranormal. One night, I was driving home from work at around 5 a.m. in the morning. After my shift, I remember walking past the fence line expressive than Ash, the boy, and not even after he came to me. It was strange because they are very good guardians, and believe me, people tend to be more scared of my dogs than they tend to be scared of people. I remember the woods around my house were very quiet, and there was a cold, chilly wind. There was something eerie in the air about that night. I can't explain it. I don't believe in the paranormal, but when you live in the outskirts of town, you just know how to interpret the signals when things are off. It's not about being superstitious, it's about trusting your instincts. So, I immediately walk inside, go towards the stairs placed at the entrance, and that's when my dogs appear. Their bodies were shaking, and they moved their tails a lot, and they were nervous. I just made them enter the house with me and lock everything up again. I was just tired after work. So, I checked the windows in the kitchen door that goes towards the garden. Everything seemed safe and locked. I remember I was about to turn on my heels when I suddenly feel this sudden chill running down my spine. Donut and Ash began whimpering by my side. Ash is a very stoic dog naturally. At some point, he begins barking, and Donut follows suit. They move towards the garden door, barking at it. Curiously, I look at the window, and that was when I saw it. A bear-sized creature staring at me from the woods. I realized something was wrong when the creature had red eyes and antlers. Bears do not have antlers, and no neighbor of mine keeps elk that I'm aware of, and none of those animals anyway have red eyes. It emitted this high-pitched noise, something between the laugh of a hyena and a wolf's howl. The creature stared at me, returning on its path towards the woodline. I remember the tales of the Ozark Howler, but I always believed them to be a hoax. To this day, I prefer to believe I was tired from work, and that some weird animal just got inside my backyard, and my mind played tricks on me. I keep the trash and the dog's food in the backyard, so perhaps it came attracted by the smell. The antlers are, though, something I can't explain, and to be honest, I think it's better to be left that way. Hello, might I just say that I'm a huge fan of your channel, and I usually listen to your channel at night, before bed. I'm also naturally from Portugal, so English is not my strong suit. Bear with me. I'm a 50-year-old man, and I work receiving visitors for a place that rents cabins by Crane Creek. I'm well acquainted with local folklore, but find myself to be skeptical. I have Native American neighbors who have very spiritual beliefs. I respect them. It's not that I'm a non-believer. It's just that I tend to find logical explanations for things. When it comes to this type of matter, I remain silent. It doesn't cost much to be mean to the people around you. I remember a particular night when I welcomed a family at the cabins. They had spent the day at Yosemite, and the father was too tired to drive home. They had 2 kids of around 7 to 10 years old, who just kept quarreling and yelling at each other, interrupting the adults. I remember telling them not to go too far into the woods, but that it was okay if they wanted to take a stroll. I work on night shifts, but most of my nights off-season involved me listening to the radio and spending time alone. At some point, I believe it was around 2 a.m., I remember seeing our cat. We keep one. The owner found one by the road in the afternoon, staring at the window, with its spine all tense. I believed there was coyotes outside, so I took a broom to scare it off. I wouldn't say I like using guns, and left the cabin. What I saw out there was not a coyote, but a white furry thing walking on 2 legs. Its fur was white, and it lacked arms. It was too dark for me to see more, but it lacked a muzzle, or at least I couldn't see its contours. At first, I thought it was the boys playing a prank, but nothing was around the creature, and there was no way the parents would let the children alone at night. I must say that I was somewhat nervous but not scared. I started hearing weird screeching noises and high-pitched sounds around the thing and me at some point. I knew a bit about the Fresno nightcrawler creatures, but never believed I'd see one myself one time. I must confess, the sounds frightened me, so I did what all people with common sense would do and got inside. The following day, I was relieved by the person who works the day shift, a man with native relatives. I told him the previous night's events, and he said to me that I did good returning inside. While these night crawlers, I'm assuming are witch, aren't evil, it's better to leave them be. As I was leaving, the family came for breakfast. I left it prepared for them, and I remember them commenting on how they had heard weird high-pitched noises during the night. A chill ran down my back, but I made those 2 comments. Last year, my family and I moved from our apartment into a new house that we had bought in Michigan. The house was exceptionally large and beautiful. The architecture is like an old Victorian house with a bit of modern details splashed in. It seemed like somebody tried to cover up the old beautiful furniture by adding some modern pieces. But all in all, my family fell in love with the house and bought it as soon as we found it. We lived in an apartment my entire life. It was a big change moving, especially because we moved to a more countryside-like area where all the houses were quite far away from each other. We didn't really have many neighbors. My new school was like a 20-minute bus ride, but the good thing was that there were buses to this really big garden with many trees and plants. In front of the house, there was also a big patio with a swing and chairs, perfect for friends or family gatherings. Except, we moved during the winter, so it was going to be a while until I got to arrange those. Even though my mother and dad enjoyed their privacy and loved their peace and quiet, me being the extrovert I am, did not like it very much. But I was going to have to get used to it. It had a bit of a creepy vibe to it, just because it was quite far away from everyone else, and I was a fan of horror movies, so I saw these kinds of houses all the time. I was definitely going to stop watching them. The first week we lived there, I actually expected weird things to happen, because it kind of had that effect on me, but even then, I knew I would get used to it, and there was probably nothing weird about it. The first time I was alone in the house, I heard something cracking upstairs from the kitchen. But when I went to check it out, there was nothing. So I Googled it, and it said that an old flooring could make that kind of noise from the built-up air underneath. It made a lot of sense, and I didn't hear it anymore as I left for school. My parents both worked 12-hour shifts, so I was going to get back before them that day. As I entered the house when I got back, I felt a weird scent inside, but it couldn't have been because nothing was turned on when I left earlier that day. I checked the oven and everything anyway, just in case, but nothing could explain the smell. I thought it must have been bursting from the walls or something, so I opened all the windows for it to get out. On the background tour of the house, I remember a woman telling us it was built in 1921 and renovated several times thereafter. An old house like that obviously must have strange scents all over it. When my parents came back, I decided to keep quiet and not tell them about it. They would probably just get annoyed, and I would ruin their vibe, just as we had moved in. They were really loving the house, and I saw in them that they were happy and proud that they accomplished something like that. So why should I ruin it with my dumb little silly observations? The next morning, I woke up at around 10, and I heard them laughing in the kitchen. It was weird because they went to work at 9, usually, so I wondered why they had stayed later today. I didn't care that much to get right up. I stayed in bed for an hour, scrolling through my social media. When I finally decided to get up, they had already left. I was going to ask them tonight why they stayed so late today. When all I got back home, I'd asked them, and they told me they left at 8 in the morning. I thought they were messing with me, asking them how I heard them laughing in the kitchen. They called me crazy, said I was teasing them. They wouldn't laugh in the morning, right after they got up. That did not make any sense because who could I have heard when we lived alone? There's no other houses for at least a mile. I was uneasy and I still thought they were messing with me. But in my conscience, I still had that question, what if they weren't really in the house? Well, that night, I barely fell asleep for a few hours from thinking about it. I was studying in the morning when I heard somebody knocking. It seemed like they were going to kick the door in, and I hurried to open. But as I was going down the stairs, it suddenly ceased. When I opened the door, there was nobody there. I checked around the house to see if there were kids trying to mess with me, but I literally could not see a soul anywhere. They must have run away at the speed of light. I didn't see anything. I ignored it, continuing my study, and went to school. When I came back, I told my parents about it right away, and they said what I'd been thinking. It must have been a few kids from nearby or something. I had an extremely uneasy feeling the next few days. I didn't know what to think about it from all the weird things happening. Maybe I was just exaggerated and thought of them in my head. On a Saturday night, my parents worked the night shifts, and I had some friends over and we had a few drinks. At around midnight, the light in the living room started flashing. I thought the light bulb was dying, but then stopped working before continuing normally. We forgot about it during the night, but the window literally opened on its own, probably just from the wind. I went to shut it and realized there was no wind. It was just cold outside. We went to sleep at around 2 a.m., and as I was falling asleep, I heard someone, or once again, it stopped. When I opened the door, a big wave of cold air came over me, and I saw something on the ground. It was prints. Large prints. They looked like 3-toed prints, easily over 12 inches long. I would know. My dad has pretty large, wide feet, and they led from the snow all the way back to the woodline. Something big was watching us by the window. I don't know what it was, some sort of creature or something. Ever since then, I'd been extremely freaked out, thinking there was a monster trying to get in. And I would always know it was near after this, because every time it was, there'd be this strange magnetic static feeling in the air. This same behavior and activity continued on for years afterwards. Whatever this mysterious creature was, or maybe it was a demon manifesting, brought on all this paranormal strange activity in the house. I never saw its face, but multiple times we would see large prints in the snow and in the mud and dirt right by the window and by the door. like it was trying to get in the house. It never did, though. I tried to show my father the prints, but he was just in complete denial about the whole thing. Told me it was all made up. I've long since moved out, but my parents are still very much there, and I don't even ask them if they've had anything weird, because they simply don't acknowledge it. So maybe they have had their own encounters with it. This particular event happened to me on a camping night in the forest of New Jersey. My father, brother, and I are the outdoor type of people and love camping, hiking, and such activities that requires spending time out in nature. My mother, on the other hand, hates bugs, plants, and darkness, and never joins us on our trips. We've been planning a camping trip for about 3 weeks ahead, because the spot we picked in New Jersey, the weather report the whole time to pick out a slightly cooler night. It was in the middle of August, and you know how it is. It's extremely hot. The day finally arrived. We packed up all of our stuff and headed for the forest. We arrived during the late afternoon, and just had enough time to set up everything before the night settled in. It was already now a bit cooler. We pitched up the tent, lit up a campfire, and started cooking some stew. We always carried guns with us, in case we needed to defend ourselves from any animal, but luckily, we had never had to use them. The first evening went by, and quickly, it was wonderful. We talked for hours, ate delicious stew, and we even told a round of good old ghost stories before bed, for old time's sake. My brother and I shared a bigger tent, while our father slept in a smaller one by himself. He snored a lot during the night, and it could get really annoying sometimes, if you don't fall asleep before him. After hitting the sack, we all dozed off pretty quickly, tired from all the work that we had did. The next day, we had a hiking trip planned. The day was slightly cooler than the last one, and it was a perfect time to explore the area. We headed toward a small hill that looked like it had some monument on it. We didn't want to stray much from the road, because it was our first time camping here and we could easily get lost. We walked in a pretty straight line through some bushes around trees to reach the hilltop. On it was indeed a monument of a man holding a hand on his forehead, gazing in the distance. There was nothing written on it. We had no idea what it was or what it meant, but snapped a few photos just for fun. The trip was excellent so far, and everything was going great, up until the second night. It was a little later, after midnight, and Dad was already asleep, but my brother and I were talking inside our tent. We both heard a sound coming from somewhere in the forest. It wasn't loud, but it wasn't a blunt noise, like an animal putting its leg on the ground. We didn't think much of it at first, but after the first thump, 3 more followed, and it sounded like something was getting closer. The fire was out, so it was pretty dark, and we had to rely on a flashlight to see. I swung the light around and noticed 2 red dots next to the nearest tree. After it saw the light, it raised its head and started walking toward us slowly. My body froze in fear. I knew what was coming at us. It was the Jersey Devil. For those who don't know what the Jersey Devil is, it's a creature that lives in the forest in this area, the Pine Barrens, and it looks very peculiar. On its feet are hooves, like a horse, and its head is almost reminiscent to a horse's as well. But this thing is not your regular farm animal. It's this demonic combination of creatures, even with its huge wings that resemble a bat, and a long snake-like tail. Our parents used to tell us stories about the legend of the Jersey Devil, and how it would eat children that misbehaved. I saw many supposed photos and fiction articles on the internet about it, but I never believed it could be real, until now. As I said, this thing appeared to be slowly approaching our camp, hissing at us from a distance. My brother was the first one to scream for my dad to wake up. The creature seemed to be irritated by the noise. It sped up and began galloping, waving its long tail along the way. When it got closer, it widened its jaw, and I can get a good look at its teeth. They weren't really long at all, but they looked as sharp as razor blades. It was charging straight at me, and I managed to stop it from biting me with a flashlight. And suddenly, the creature began flying above us, ripping the light from my hand and breaking it into pieces. Everything went dark again. I instructed my brother to get the emergency flare and light it. Luckily, he managed to do it before the thing had a chance to strike again, and we could see it gliding above us. It tried to swoop down and bite me, but my brother pointed the flare at it, burning it just enough for it to back off. Seconds later, we could hear the sound of our dad loading the rifle, and the next sound we heard was a boom. Dad fired at this thing, and it seemed to strike it in the wing. The creature screeched, disappearing into the darkness. We lit up a lantern and began packing up all of our things in case this devil tried to come back. I hate it when we have to cut our trip short, but I was happy and eager to get out of there as possible. I will remember that feeling of fear as long as I live. It was traumatizing. My paternal grandparents' house used to be in the woods because they loved nature and wished to grow old alone without other people disturbing them. We used to visit them often and bring them sweets, snacks, and food. When I first got a boyfriend, they wanted me to bring them so they could meet him, judge him themselves, and then approve of him for me. I am the first granddaughter. That's why they were so protective and caring for me. After 6 months of dating, my parents' house with my now ex-boyfriend, we saw this thing on the side of the road that looked like a naked person with its back turned to us. It was leaning against a tree. Its skin did not appear normal. It was more blue than peach and scaly like a snake. It did not move still and stood like a statue. We both saw it and freaked out. My ex-boyfriend sped the car till we reached my grandparents' house. We did not tell them exactly what happened, but indirectly asked them if they had seen anything weird or any weird creature near their house. They said they haven't seen anything weird. It must be because they have such weak eyesight. Anyway, a few hours later, we decided to return back to our house. My grandparents seemed tired. It was only 6 o'clock, but it was dark outside, and the woods somehow felt creepier. As my ex-boyfriend was driving, I turned on the radio to listen to some music. Some time had passed and none of us spoke, quietly listening to songs that played on the radio. What happened after was all of a sudden so sudden, and both of us were shocked. That same scaly thing that looked like a naked human came out of the woods in front of us. This time, however, we could see it clearly under the headlights and sense it was in front of us. It had thin arms and legs attached to a thin body. It had a huge alien-like head and huge green eyes that glowed. At the place of the mouth, there was a thin line and had no nose. It was covered in green and blue scales like that of a fish. It just kind of stared at us for a moment, and then ran away on the opposite side of the road in the woods. It ran awkwardly, as if not comfortable in its skin or not experienced enough with its legs, just like a baby waddles when first learning how to walk. But the absurdity of the situation did not stop there. Right after, a deer hopped in front of it, as if it were chasing the alien. Was it a deer, or just another alien in a deer's body, is a question. It probably won't ever be answered. It felt more like an alien because it had strikingly purple eyes that glowed, and its antlers were abnormally big, forming a perfect spiral atop. The deer wasn't just brown, but it had spots of black and white too. It also followed the alien to the other side of the road. As it was walking away, we noticed that it had a purple color. 2 baby deer also followed the large deer moments after, and they all had the same spiral antlers and strange purple coloring to their body. After the road cleared, my ex sped the car and kept speeding until we reached the city. It was shocking and absurd to see such stuff. We never believed in paranormal activity or UFOs and stuff. We were shocked. We never spoke about what we had seen that night. I don't know if he had slept that night, but I always kept twisting and turning in bed, thinking about the creatures we had seen. The next day, we met again and discussed what we had seen. It was apparent both of us were in disbelief, but soon we came to terms with what had happened and accepted it as reality. Although we didn't share the story of the incident with anybody, with fear nobody would believe us and call us liars and attention seekers. We kept it to ourselves until now. I'm sharing this story with the world, hoping to know if anybody else had experienced what we had. When I first got my driving license at the age of 19, I was very excited and used to take my car out for driving almost every other day. On one particular night, I was feeling extra reckless and drove till I reached the woods far out from the city. It was then that I had realized I had driven way too far and now it was getting late, so I turned back to go home. As I'm driving back, I stopped at a gas station to refill and got some snacks. I picked out my snacks and had a small conversation with the cashier, who was a mere college student, trying to pay her own way. But when I turned back to leave the gas station, I looked at the fisheye mirror attached to the ceiling and saw a creepy old woman smirking at me in the place of a cashier. I spun back to see where the girl was, but when I turned, the college girl was in the same place as the woman was before. Finding it all too creepy, I left the store, got in my car, and took a moment to recollect myself, then sped away. I was scared. I had heard all kinds of scary stuff, like shapeshifters and mimics, but I never thought I would actually encounter one myself. The story I'm about to share with you might sound incredibly out of pocket, but I can only share with you what I've witnessed. Whether you believe me or not, or is completely up to you. Having said that, I know there must be people out there who saw the same thing I did. If so, I can only hope that you share your story as well. So, I'm 25 right now, and this happened a couple of years back. See, I'm from Norway, but moved to the US recently. I fell in love with California when traveling there years ago, deciding to take a leap of faith and move there. The incident also took place in the US. Not really in the US, but in one of the states. Me and my family had just traveled to Alaska. We've been going sailing for years, something we love doing together. We always traveled to other countries to go on sailing trips there, just because it was way more interesting and we got to see new places. This trip in Alaska Alaska is beautiful, and we enjoyed every minute of it. 2 days before we planned to leave to go back to Norway, me and my father were the only ones outside on the boat. Everybody else was inside at the time. Dad and I were on opposite sides of the boat, minding our own business when it happened. I saw something moving in the water, not too far from the boat. I was trying to figure out what it was when it began approaching. A couple of meters away from us, it surfaced. I have a lot of experience with any type of sea creature, but I had never seen or heard about whatever it was that I saw out there. For starters, the animal got pretty high above the water, and secondly, and most importantly, it looked very strange. I couldn't see every detail, but what I did notice was that it had fur, and it was completely covered. It was strange and had a very bizarre face, with features I'd never seen. It was large. I couldn't make sense of whatever it was. I knew my dad could not see it from where he was standing. I was scared to move or make any sound. I didn't want to scare it off, or I also didn't want it seeing me. I was scared and fascinated. I still am. I honestly can't tell you what I saw because I don't know. I tried doing some research, but could not find anything of use. I'm really hoping that I could see it again one day, and I'm planning on going sailing in Alaska soon. I feel like that's where I can find it. I want to know if there are more. I also did not tell my family. I know they wouldn't take me seriously anyway. It's been my little secret up until now. In October of the year 2000, my friends and I went hiking in the mountains of Yosemite National Park. There were 5 of us, 2 girls and 3 guys. We took the Mist Trail, and our destination was Vernal Falls. We planned to set a picnic near the falls and enjoy the wonders of nature. The journey was smooth. It was a lot of fun hiking with my friends, and it was revitalizing, just an overall pleasant experience. Everything was going great, until it happened. Someone or something called us. In the middle of our journey, we heard this voice. It was a man's asking for help. We were alone at that time and saw no other hikers, so it kinda spooked us at first. At first, it was faint and unclear, but as we listened, we realized that it was a cry for help. We looked around but did not see or notice anybody. One of the girls in our group, Deanna, was the first to take action. She shouted back, asking, "Where are you?" We waited for a response because there was a pause. It seemed to have heard us. After a while, it answered saying the word help, and it kept repeating the word help. But looking back at it now, its tone did not add up to the situation. Like it was asking for help, but it did not sound urgent. Rather, it sounded like it wasn't even trying. Anyway, we looked around the area and managed to pinpoint the location. We went towards it, and when we finally found out where it was coming from, we just saw a shadow of a silhouette of a person, and it wasn't moving. It was still as a statue, and far from us. We were on elevated ground while it was below. Its lower body was hidden in thick foliage. The weather was also bright. It was standing or sitting still. I had a hard time telling. It wasn't swaying, but we could see that it was facing us. We did not even utter a single word towards it when we found it. It appears that it already knew where we were and where we come from. I don't remember much, but I knew we didn't manage to find where the voice was coming from for a while, so I'm assuming it should be the same for this person or thing. We thought it was a person, but my friend Andrew suddenly told us to stop. He was the type of guy who had major trust issues, and he would doubt anything. I mean anything or anyone, especially strangers. We were puzzled and asked him why. He shushed us, told us to be quiet, and then shouted, "What happened?" towards the silhouette. Then it answered, "Hurt." It kept repeating that word over and over, with shorter intervals in between, and its voice was getting louder, like it was getting angry or impatient. Now, maybe it's just me, but it definitely sounded angry. Andrew kept pursuing to initiate a conversation with it, asking what the problem was. But this person or thing just kept repeating the word hurt. It couldn't make a single sentence. We assumed it might be a foreigner that was hurt. And then Andrew asked for its name. Then it became silent, like it was pondering what to say. It appears like that because just a minute ago, it was repeating the word hurt nonstop, and then it would suddenly go quiet. Like, why? Yeah, I understand it might be a foreigner, but what Andrew asked was the simplest form of English. A foreigner should be able to know it, right? Anyway, we waited for about a minute or two, and during that time, we felt some pretty weird vibes. And to make it officially weirder, that man or thing didn't answer Andrew's question, and just shouted the word come. And then it alternated using the word hurt and come. It would utter the words with short intervals in between. The voice the entire time sounded crackly and distorted. It reminded me of somebody playing an audio recording back through an old AM radio. Then and there, Andrew wanted to bail out. He said he had a really bad feeling about this guy. Deanna, on the other hand, at least wanted to know what happened, because we could be dealing with a person's livelihood. We did share Deanna's concern. After convincing Andrew, we were just going to go for a closer look, and we finally agreed. As we got closer, we managed to see it better. It was a man wearing dark clothing, and it had a cloth-like garb over its head. We took a few more steps toward it, when his or its voice suddenly changed, like it was getting higher and pitched, like it was excited. And finally, it didn't take long before it sounded like a screech, but then stopped and became silent, immediately reverting back to a man's voice. We stopped and looked at each other and thought, what in God's name? It took a while to register. Then we asked each other to confirm what we had heard. We all felt this uneasiness, and we all felt the goosebumps. We turned around in a hurry, going back through the way we came. For all we know, this could be a trap by some serial killer or lunatics. As we're heading back, we honestly didn't know what, but at some point, the voice just to get a glimpse of that person or thing. We wanted to confirm if it was still there, but it was gone. Somewhere deep in my mind, I knew it would be gone, and confirming it just sent shivers down my spine. It was really luring us. We hurried back and told the others. then decided to head back entirely, postponing our journey. We did not continue unless that thing followed us and waited for us on our way back from the falls. We didn't take any chances. On our way back, we dejected, but there's always next time, a creature who would mimic a human's voice to lure in their victims. It wasn't that hard to find. It's one of the more popular topics when talking about hiking accidents. It's a creature called a mimic. It would lure you in, like what it did to us. It would ask for help, and then you'd either fall off a cliff or get trapped in a hole somewhere. Have anybody experienced this before? I personally believe what we encountered was a young mimic. Maybe it couldn't control its voice. I don't know. I'm just guessing. This encounter happened on August 2nd of 2008. Me and my best friend lived in California. We rarely see each other because of our super busy schedules, but one day, we decided to take a hike to Sequoia and Kings Canyon National Park. It was the weekend we both are free, and so we went on a joyride. We rode in my friend's pickup truck. We got there by 10. The place was vast and beautiful, and the path was perfect for all outdoor activity and exercise. We didn't really hike with much eagerness, but rather we just took a walk. We picnicked and caught up, talking about all the happenings in each other's lives. I remember looking at my watch. It was around 5:40. We decided to call it a day and head back. Most of the time, we were just chatting about deep stuff like space and other topics you would lose yourself to. I remember because I would constantly be looking at my Apple Watch, tracking my steps. It was one of those moments where it's just you and your friend sharing things and catching up. We didn't notice, and time passed until it was already getting dark. The sun was setting, we were heading back, talking about things I don't remember anymore. In front of us was a small bridge, maybe 12 feet in length. There was also a lamppost on each side of the bridge. We had to cross the bridge to get back, and at that time, we were absent-mindedly walking. Our focus was on each other and the things of conversation. We were also all alone at the time. There was nobody else on the trail, no other hikers in sight, and we didn't mind. The bridge was made of sturdy wood, so we got on the small bridge, and when we were walking, we heard this growl beneath us. It was a small bridge, and under it was a shallow stream, so we heard the growl loud and clear. We stopped and froze. It was so sudden. We looked down and took a step back. Our steps made some noise, and whatever was below us didn't seem to like it, because it growled again. It was a very vocal growl, like that of a beast. At first, we thought it might be a bear, but bears don't sound like that. We stayed silent, not really knowing what to do. After all, we can't just ignore the fact that there might be a bear beneath us, and we're not even sure if it was a bear. It sounded nothing like one. It sounded bigger because of how loud it was. That was the first thing that came to mind. Anyway, we tried to stay calm. We stood there, breathing heavy breaths and communicating using hand signs. My friend and I decided to slowly slide our foot and get close to the other side of the bridge as much as we could, and took off the moment we were ready. Little by little, we managed to slide our foot, and we got closer and closer to the middle of the bridge, when, all of a sudden, the creature below us began producing this weird gibberish sound. It sounded like it was trying to speak, but I don't know, it was hard to tell. Thinking about it now, it was trying to talk to us. It definitely was aware that we were on top of it. It did not want us to leave. This thing was literally below us. We could not move fast enough because the slightest footstep would trigger it. We could also hear it move because the splashes of water every now and then. Our hearts were racing, and me personally, I could feel cold sweat on my back, and my stomach was aching out of nervousness. Whatever it was wants us to stay. Finally, after a few moments that felt like hours, my friend could not take it anymore. He tightened his bag around his body. He was also in almost a runner's position. I copied him, and we waited for then. Like a mutual understanding, without any verbal exchange. We ran like crazy, crossing the bridge. I experienced a massive adrenaline rush like I've never experienced before. We heard a very angry growl. Instinctively, I looked back and saw a glimpse of this huge hairy hand clasping the bridge, and this small little head popping out. All I saw was a hairy face, but the light from the lamppost reflected, showing two glowing eyes, like that of a cat's. My heart pounded so hard, I thought I was going to have a heart attack. I saw it as I tried to climb up the bridge like a monkey. Its body was huge, like that of a gorilla. Probably no more than 5 feet tall, though. It was just very broad. I looked forward, didn't dare to look back anymore, honestly contemplating if I should just leave my bag behind as we got further and further. Once we got more away, we managed to see another hiking group just ahead. My friend shouted at me that it was no longer following us, but we did not stop. We only stopped to breathe when we got near the other hikers. I was panting and my hands were shaking, like without my control. We contemplated if we should tell these hikers, but in the end, we didn't. They probably would have thought we were nuts. We stayed close to them, though, until we made it back to our truck. We managed to finally breathe properly. Then, as we stared at each other in shock, while our hands shook nonstop. Like a mutual understanding, we threw our bags on the back of his pickup and then got on. The rest of the ride, we barely spoke. I told him what I saw and that was it. Has anybody encountered this creature before? I've heard from an expert that I guess we had encountered a juvenile Sasquatch, but honestly, I don't know enough about Bigfoot to come to that conclusion. My grandparents live somewhere surrounded by nature, almost completely and entirely closed off from anyone and everyone. The only time they leave their home is when they need to get groceries or have to go to the doctor, which seems rare. I don't know them very well, as we spend little time together. My mom, however, feels like it is important for me and my sisters to have some type of bond with them, so we stay over for a week every year. My mom does not stay there with us, because her and my grandparents don't really get along whatsoever. I completely get why. They are not the nicest people around, let me tell you that. We don't really enjoy going, but we make the best of it anyway. Their house is surrounded by the highest trees, as far as the eye can reach. They want to keep us inside, because they don't want to risk us getting lost. I feel like it's not them fearing for our safety, more so fearing having to walk around outside to look for us, like we're little kids. Can't blame Mom for not wanting to have anything to do with her mom and dad. I will blame her for forcing us to do what she doesn't want to do herself. During the week we spend there, we just sit inside all day. Me and my sisters just play board games, whilst my grandma knits and my grandpa reads the paper. That goes on all throughout the day, until this one time. It was late, I remember that. Probably 4 in the afternoon. Me and one of my sisters were upstairs putting our pajamas on and talking. That's when she heard something outside. She pointed it out to me, but I didn't hear anything. A couple of seconds later, I heard something too. It sounded like a large branch breaking. It was loud. We sat there on our knees, looking outside through the small bedroom window. After a couple of seconds, the same sound. It was now getting closer, and we're both wondering what could have made the sound like that. It was already getting dark out, so we could not see much. After a couple of minutes of just sitting there, not hearing any more sounds, I was just about to turn around, and that's when we saw it. Standing right next to one of the trees, just by the garden. We saw, and I still cannot explain, all I can tell you is that it was really big. It looked kind of like a monkey, but a giant one. Very muscular, standing upright on its hind legs. I had never seen anything like it before. It was scary looking, especially the face. When I looked at my sister, I could tell she was just as terrified. Her face was pale, and she was staring. I remember shaking. I don't know why we were so scared, but the thing was just standing there, not doing anything, and we were safe upstairs. I get the impression it was observing and looking around, like looking for somewhere to go. There was just something about it, I don't know. I get shivers whenever I think about it. When we turned back to look, it was gone. It's by far the weirdest experience I've ever had in my life, no doubt. My parents were hunters when I was growing up, and we spent nearly every weekend in the woods, which helped my brothers and I become pretty familiar with nature and very comfortable. This happened 5 years ago, when I was 23. After helping move to an apartment, I found myself missing those woods, so I decided to go camping at the first chance that I could. Now, I should tell you that I've been a big fan of cryptozoology since an early age. I've always kind of wanted to see one firsthand. Not necessarily Bigfoot, but anything that would kind of fit into that category, for sure. It was mid-August and hot as hell. I'm from the desert southwest, so I'd figured I'd look for a relatively shaded spot in the woods to set up and camp. The first location was alright, but it quickly became apparent I was not alone there. I could hear what sounded like large people walking around and talking outside my tent all night. The only problem is the language they were speaking was gibberish and sounded almost like Vietnamese. It was very strange and high-pitched. I moved to a different spot the following day, setting up camp. Within an hour of being there, I heard something big walking through the woods towards my camp. I grabbed my knife, held it tight, and flashlight, and started following the noise. It was definitely something large, and I remember thinking, oh, if it's a bear, I'm in trouble. But before I could even finish that thought, the creature came into view, and it was unlike anything I'd ever seen. It had a human-like body, but the head was more canine, and the eyes were solid black. It kind of reminded me of a large coyote or a hyena. I remember being frozen in terror as the thing quickly looked at me, looked back from where it came from, and bolted the way it came. I'm not sure how long I stood there for, but eventually, the fear had subsided enough that I went back to my campsite. I packed up and left as soon as the sun came up, awaiting this thing to come back. It never did, which is probably a good thing. I could have been a dead man and not lived to tell my story. On June 1st, 2017, at approximately 1 a.m., I was on my way home from work. I work the graveyard shift and am usually asleep by the time I get home. Well, this night, I was wide awake. It's not that abnormal for me to be up at the top of my car. There was a streetlight shining down on it, just enough for me to see that whatever I was looking at looked like a large ape, or something walking on two legs. The way its gait was, and swinging its arms as it walked and moved. It just seemed weird. I slowed down, stopping my vehicle, and I even got out of my car. Sounds crazy, right? But as I got closer, I see this thing bolting off into the woods. I got out of my car initially because I thought it was a man, somebody who needed help. But after seeing it take off that quickly, well, I don't know. I live in a rural area, and there's not many people around, let alone animals. Sometimes you'll see hitchhikers, and I always try and offer a ride. I was pretty curious. I'm not sure what you would call it, but it wasn't anything I'd ever seen before, and I'm pretty sure it wasn't a bear. It also did not look like a monkey, as they have tails and the way they take off running. I got back in my car and drove home. Freaked out, but not enough to lose all in total composure. When I was 19, I had a job as a security guard for a building construction site. We were patrolling the site. The company that I worked for also did overnight security at a local college. It should also be noted that this place is very remote, 30 miles away from any town large enough to have more than one stoplight. The nearest big city was about 2 or 3 hours away. One night, myself and one other security guard were on a walk around the property. It was about 2 a.m. We were just about to enter the building that we were assigned to watch when we both saw something. I turned to look, and there, standing about 30 feet away, right by the tree line, was a creature I can only describe as looking like a werewolf. I froze, and the other security guard, who had been with me for about 2 years, knew I was not the kind of person to make things up. They also saw it. We stood there, stared at each other, and then stared back at it. I realized this was no one in a costume. It was real, and had an expression like it wanted to kill us. The other security guard tapped me on the shoulder and said, "Let's go," and we both turned and ran. I don't know what it was, but I'm glad it did not chase after us. I was walking my dog in a wooded area near my house. It was early evening and beginning to get dark. As I walked, I could hear something moving through the wilderness in the woods parallel to me, but I couldn't see what it was. The noise it made sounded like a cross between a gorilla and a hyena. It was growling and screeching. The hairs on the back of my neck stood up, and I began to run. As I ran, I could hear the thing running after me, crashing through the underbrush. I thought for sure it was going to catch me, but then it stopped following me and went back into the woods. I had my son's baseball bat with me. After the first time it chased me, I dropped it. I was so scared that I didn't go back to get it. I have had several sightings of something large and hairy, usually between 6 o'clock in the evening and about 3 or 4 in the morning. Once at home, there were also loud howls outside our house, right around midnight, which woke us all up. We checked outside and saw nobody, but heard loud footfalls in the nearby woods. A couple of weeks later, we were awakened by howling around 3 a.m., and several hours after, my husband and I saw a large dark shape moving behind some trees in our backyard. I've seen these things twice, up close and in person. Once I was at a park with my dog and 2 friends, and we witnessed this creature moving, no more than 20 feet away. We thought at first it was a man, due to the way it walked, and we could see its enormous gait and long arms which swung like a monkey's would, only very fast and powerful looking. It also made loud grunting noises as it moved through the brush very quickly. This took place in Colorado, in a place called Spring Canyon. I went out coon hunting with my friends. I'm not one to believe in the unknown, but this changed my views on some things. Myself and 3 of my friends had piled into a Ranger-type vehicle with our hounds. We were hunting for raccoons that night. With us was my dad's dog, who placed closest to the passenger door of the truck. My dad's dog is a blue tick hound and is quite big for his breed. He's a running hound, meaning that he runs his prey down instead of cornering it to run it out. He has extremely good stamina and is very strong for his size. I've taken him coon hunting many times and have never seen him quit on me more than once. My dad's been hunting his whole life. He's never seen anything he could not kill with a gun. He's also a Vietnam veteran and has killed more than his fair share of men. He's also an extremely religious man and is convinced there is no way the creature he saw was of this earth. As we're driving down this backcountry road, all of a sudden, the dog jumps out of the truck and takes off into the woods. We all jump out to go get him, and as we're running towards where he went, we hear this other noise in the woods. It sounded like something was running at us, but way faster than any man or animal could run. My friend got camera shy and turned back towards the truck when he heard it coming towards us. We all ran for our lives and lost it. We got inside the truck. As we're getting in, my dad caught a glimpse of what he saw. It was standing there, at the edge of the woodline, watching us run away. His claim was that it looked like a large gorilla but had longer arms and smaller eyes. They were almost kind of glowing this ominous color. My dad has always been skeptical about this stuff, but after what he saw, which was less than 100 yards away, he's now fully convinced that there are things out there that are not of this earth. We always joke with him about it because the dude is well known for his drinking and smoking back in our hometown. So you could imagine how much more ribbing we got out of him when the old hunting stories came out. That, of course, is long before he became a Christian. So we're riding back towards my dad's house and we start talking about what we saw. I've always also been skeptical of this kind of thing, but now I would consider myself a true believer. We all had witnessed something that was beyond our power to explain through any logical means. The only problem was, if anybody who did not see it with their own eyes found out about it, they would think we're all crazy. As we're driving, my friend's dad starts singing a gospel song at the top of his lungs. My friend in the back seat starts punching him, saying, "Shut up," You're going to get us killed if that thing hears us. We had to go back later on and retrieve our dog, who was wandering around there. I'm not a particularly religious person, but I do believe in God, and I've always been what you would call a skeptic, and I don't like to just take things at face value. So, I've always been somebody who wants to know the explanations for things, and up until this experience, I've never had an experience that I couldn't really explain, and all this is kind of what motivated me to start trying to find answers. It was summertime in Colorado Springs. My family and I went to a flea market in downtown. We parked the car, and were walking into the store, and my mother was acting strange. She turned to me and said, "Don't let go of my hand. I don't want anything to happen to you." And I looked around, and there was nothing around us that would make her feel that way. Keep in mind, I'm also a grown man. So we go into the store, and we shop around for a while, and the entire time she's acting very paranoid, very weird. We left the store. As we're walking to the car, I asked her why she would say something like that, and she said she didn't know what I was talking about. She did not remember saying anything to me like that. Well, later on in the car, I kept asking her why she had acted so strange in the store. She then explained to me that there were these dark shadows watching over her and trying to get her. She told me she sees them all the time. They're trying to steal her soul. Now, my mother's a very coherent and intelligent person. There's no way she would make something like this up. This experience really shook me. I'd never really seen my mother like this before. This was a side of her that I'd never seen, and it was scary. I did have a very religious upbringing, so, to me, God was an old man with white hair, and he lived up in the sky somewhere. And angels were guys that played harps around his throne, and that's what I'd always pictured. And then when I had this experience, it completely changed my perspective of who or what God might be. Because I experienced something that was so much more powerful than anything I could have imagined. And so, after the experience, I decided to start reading about other people's experiences and try to understand what happened. And over the course of about 6 months, I read several different books on near-death experiences. I got very passionate when it comes to science. I think there are so many things we don't know, and many things that we know in our lives that we simply cannot begin to understand. So, when I began reading about near-death experiences and the different explanations that were out there, I was just engrossly fascinated. There are a lot of people who say that near-death experiences are nothing more than hallucinations caused by the brain en masse. I can understand how somebody might come to that conclusion because it's something that we don't have any real understanding of. But I think it's a little bit limiting to say that all near-death experiences are just hallucinations. There are too many people who have had these types of experiences who don't seem to be hallucinating. When I was younger, my mother had a very bad experience with demonic possession in our family. It was something that really terrified her, and I wonder if these demons somehow attached themselves to my mother. So, when she started seeing these shadows around her and was terrified, unfortunately, or that somebody had hexed her or put a voodoo curse on her, and we needed to find out what the person was. It broke my heart. I could tell how much fear and anguish this situation was causing her, and there was nothing I could do about it. I couldn't understand why these shadows were so intent on watching her, and I was determined to find out what or who they are. I remember at the time going to the library and trying to read every book I could get my hands on. Everything that was there in terms of information. And nowhere did I ever see anything remotely like what she was describing to me, so I knew she was not making this up. Now, it's important to note as well, my mother's side of the family has a long history of demonic activity and possession. It's something we don't really like to talk about because it's been such a source of pain and anguish for all of us. But I'd say about 20 years ago, my mother was possessed or believed to be possessed by a demon, and that itself was a terrifying experience. We had to call in a priest to exorcise the demon, and it was a really traumatic event for all of us. So, when my mother talked about seeing the shadows around her, she automatically assumed it was another demon, and she was terrified. This was in the early 2000s, by the way. And unfortunately, at the time, We did not have any understanding of what was going on. So right now, I'm just trying to process and learn more about exorcism so that I can rightfully help my mother. I know that it's something that's going to take a lot of time and effort, but I'm willing to do whatever it takes to get her better. I was 14 or 15. I had friends that lived out in the country, and we would go to their house after school and hang out for a while, and then walk back into town, maybe a mile away. It was this large open field with a playground in the center. And then, around the playground there, were apartments. The apartments that we would hang out at were by the outskirts of this field and backed up to a very small wooded area. There was also a ditch that went from back of our apartments. We were all walking down this dirt road that went through the woods when we all stopped at once, because one of my friends said they had heard something. We all stood there quiet, trying to listen for a few moments. We could not figure out what it was. We began walking again, and I was in the back of the group. I heard it before anybody else, so I stopped and whispered for everybody to stop. It sounded like a child sobbing. It sounded like it was coming from the woods to our left. We all stood there, looking into the trees, and just kept going. Quiet for a few seconds, and then the sobbing continued. We all looked at one another. Then we ran as fast as we could, back down the road, and did not look back until we got to my friend's house. We were all so terrified, we were white as ghosts, and we were shaking from head to toe. We never went back there again. We all sat in the living room and tried to rationalize what we had heard. We all came to the same conclusion that it was a child crying. Maybe somebody had got lost in the woods. My friend's dad loaded his shotgun, and we all went back out there with flashlights, calling out for anybody who needed help. We didn't find anything and went back home empty-handed and more freaked out than we first were when we went. I think that whatever we heard out there was not human. In 2009, I was out hiking with my now wife, and it was a beautiful day. I just happened to be looking off to the side, and I saw this creature. It was standing there like a human being, but its head was more like an animal. It had these bright blue eyes, and it stared at me. It didn't let me look at it for long. It was only about 20-30 feet away from me, but I got a pretty good look at it, and then it just disappeared right into the woodline. I'm not sure if what exactly I saw could be considered a cryptid, but I know for a fact it had bright blue eyes and just kind of disappeared. This thing's features definitely wasn't something you'd see every day, and it made a very big impression on me. I'm still not sure what it could have been, but it stayed with me for a long time. Anyway, I know Colorado has its share of cryptid sightings, and after hearing stories like this, I'm not sure what to believe anymore. Do you think there could be something out there? Something we just can't explain, or is it all just a mere coincidence that me and my wife have had these sightings? I was about 18 years old, living in Loveland, Colorado at the time, and my roommates and I were all up late one evening, watching TV. We had the shades open in our room, and we saw this ball of light that was moving around. It wasn't really scary, but it was definitely weird. And then, about a year ago, I was out in the middle of nowhere, driving to visit some friends, and I saw this Black Panther-like creature kind of crossing near the road. It was huge, at least as tall as me, and just sleek and black and fast. I didn't know it wasn't a bobcat or anything, and lots of people were saying things like it was either a bear or possibly a mountain lion, but it did not look like any of those things. It looked like a large black cat. Like a black panther, just huge and red eyes. I'll never forget either how its eyes glowed in the moonlight. They were red, tinted, and it moved swiftly and fluidly. Anyway, I know there's not much to my sighting, but I thought you would think it was interesting, all the stuff I've seen in Colorado. I'm a 38-year-old woman, married for 10 years with 2 young children. I have always been interested in the paranormal and have had some personal experiences that cannot be explained. I've never read about alien abductions or seen a UFO. I have nothing to gain from this, so of my knowledge. This could not have happened, I know that, and has shaken me to my core and will affect me easily for the rest of my life. As unbelievable as it sounds, I believe that I know what happened. Just out of curiosity, has anybody ever heard of an alien abduction? I never have until this happened. In the early morning hours of July 3rd, 2016, my family and I were camping in the mountains near our home in Colorado. I should also mention I'm a very outdoorsy person and love camping and hiking. We were maybe only about 5 miles in total in a remote area where this took place. That night, we stayed up with our friends around a campfire, roasting marshmallows and telling ghost stories. I remember going to bed pretty late. I woke my husband, who also felt it and said he saw something in the woods right towards our tent. He thought it was just some friends playing around and didn't know, so he went back to sleep. I could not fall back asleep, so I watched the fire and was kind of half asleep. I heard what sounded like noises, like somebody walking by our tent, as if they were looking inside. Then, what sounded like it came closer and circling around our tent to behind me, where I now felt it was not just observing me, but where it was standing behind me. Very slowly, I opened my eyes and could just barely make out a dark figure or silhouette that seemed human-like, except it had larger rounded shoulders with one arm held against its body, as if it were holding something. It stood there for what felt like several minutes before I finally closed my eyes and tried to go back to sleep. The next thing I remember is waking up again, and this time it was daylight. My husband was snoring beside me, and our children were asleep in their tents. I couldn't believe, and I thought it was all just a dream, but there was no logical explanation for what I had experienced. I had never felt so alone and vulnerable in my life, and I can't stop thinking about it. I kept wondering if it was a dream or something real. I don't know what to do with the information now. I've never seen anything like it before, so I can't really give much detail on its appearance. It did not look human, but I couldn't tell you what it did look like because it happened so fast. I feel scared just thinking about it, and my husband does not want to go back camping again. He believes me. I know this sounds crazy, but I believe that I was abducted by an alien. I've also not talked to anybody about this yet. I don't know how to. I don't want people to think I'm crazy, and it's hard to even believe myself. This has changed the way that I view the world and think about life. But I know what happened to me, so it must be true. Even though I'm a single mom of 2 kids, I've always been an avid camper and lover of the outdoors, but now I feel almost afraid to go outside because of what happened. This has shaken my belief system in every real way. I feel very confused when I woke up. It was like I suddenly realized the world is much bigger than how I always seen it, and I could not figure out why. I kept thinking that it's all real and happening to more people in the world. Why else would you see so many UFO sighting reports or alien abduction stories all around the world? I want to know what really happens in these cases, and the truth about aliens. Everything in my life feels different now. The way I see myself and the way I see my children, everything has changed. I think I was chosen by an alien for this experience because of how I felt about them before. That's just my theory, though. I hope you can understand why I had to tell somebody about what happened to me. I was born in San Francisco, California. Lived in the Bay Area until 1969, when my father bought a house in Castle Rock, Colorado. My father was an infantry soldier in World War II, and he retired from the military to work for Lockheed Martin at their Waterton Canyon facility. My grandmother came to live with us to help take care of us while our parents were at work. My mother was a stay-at-home mom, but only for a period. My father constantly was working swing shifts. I remember the valley where I lived was an ancient burial ground, supposedly. And when I was a kid, we lived in a medium-sized house in Castle Rock. I'm now 52. I have never told anybody about this experience until recently. At the time, it frightened me so much that I had trouble sharing this with my girlfriends even. My grandmother, who lived with us at the time, told me not to talk about it and scolded me for acting foolishly. She also said we didn't see anything. I was having a sleepover. At about 3 in the morning, I woke up to a large human-sized figure, glowing and white, walking by me as if it wasn't walking but gliding, like it was on ice skates. It stopped momentarily, turned to watch us, and continued to move in a slow momentum out the bedroom door, which was closed. I screamed, and in turn waking up all my friends, and they all saw it. In the same bedroom, there was a small dressing table with a mirror. I had been sitting at that dressing table earlier in the evening, putting on makeup when suddenly the lights went out, and no amount of coaxing or fiddling with the light switch would bring it back. This had happened several times in the past as well, so we just turned the lights off and went to bed. Now, I believe that figure that came into my room was possibly the spirit of one of the ancient Indians from long ago. I was too scared to get out of bed, but the next thing I knew, it disappeared. It seemed like no more than a minute or two went by. After that, only the girls saw the figure making its way through our bedroom door into my room. One of my parents came to pick them up, and one girl begged her parents to take her home. The next day is when my grandmother told me never to talk about it, and we didn't really see anything like that again. To this day, I've not really spoken to anybody about what happened until recently. This is the first time I've ever written it down. Sorry if it's hard to understand. I've tried my best to write it coherently and cohesively. I was out of town, driving on a long dirt road, and nothing around for miles. I was going about 40 miles an hour when something large landed in the middle of the road, about 200 yards ahead of me. This thing obviously did not want to be seen. It had stayed low to the ground and moved very fast. I was doing roughly 40 miles an hour, and this thing covered about 200 yards in a matter of seconds. I had my high beams on so I could see what was approaching. At this point, I think something with huge wings or bat-like. It moved very quickly and not like any bird or plane I've ever seen before. It made the hair on my arms a trees on the other side of the road, so I turned around and headed back in the direction I came from about a mile or so. There were no houses, no lights on this dirt road. This is when it gets weird. I start to hear this thumping sound, almost like the wings hitting the air as it flew toward me. My first thought was that there must have been two of these things, and one was coming at me from each side of the road. I sped up. The sound got louder. I was driving about 80 miles an hour by this point, and this thing was still keeping up with me. It finally disappeared into the woods on the other side of the road. I have no idea why that happened. Maybe it got hit by my car, or maybe it just disappeared into the woods. I drove all the way home without speeding after this. I was a little shaken up, and my heart was pounding out of my chest. That's when I realized I had to call a friend and tell him what had happened, to not go out at night by himself. And my friend, the one who saw the same thing, said he would never go out at night by himself again either. I can send you the audio I made. The quality is not great, but it's something my friend took after I called him to tell what happened. It was very windy that night, and it's kind of what you hear in the recording. Also, I remember a few weeks after this incident took place, my friend told me that he saw strange lights in the backyard, went outside to see what was going on. He said these lights flashed at him as if they were warning him, then disappeared. I know he is not the only one who has seen these. I feel like it has something to do with what we saw that night. I grew up in Colorado Springs, or another during my life, and I'm very comfortable in the wilderness. I'm also a pretty avid outdoorsman and have been hunting, including archery hunting, since I was old enough to hold a gun. I'm looking for advice on what to do now. I know what I saw, but it's not something you can easily go tell people about without sounding crazy. I want to be able to figure out if there's any kind of reasonable explanation for this or not. At first, I thought it was a werewolf. It was standing on two legs, but its back was hunched over, and its arms were very long. It had hair covering its face, and it appeared to have a mix of animal and human features. I also could not tell if it was male or female. On Tuesday night, at around 9 p.m. CST, July 17th, 2005. A friend and I went outside to a field just outside of Denver. It was dark already. This is a very popular area with mountain bikers and people going four-wheeling. It's an old cemetery that's been vandalized by carvings and gravestones and gang symbols and graffiti. I should also add that I'm into anything paranormal and have been investigating the supernatural since I was a late teen. I'm also an animal rights activist for most of my adult life and have volunteered with a number of different animal rescue organizations. But anyway, that's all fluff. I was out in the pasture with my friend when I saw it. We were just about to leave and I see this thing standing about 80 yards away from us. It was completely dark by then, so I had a hard time seeing it in detail, but I could see how large it was and how hairy it was, and that it had a really weird face. I did not have my camera with me, so taking a picture was rough. My friend did not believe me at first when I told him what I saw. It appeared to be about 5 feet tall. It was kind of hunched over and was coming out of some kind of strange tree line that I could not see. I don't know what it was, but I'm pretty sure it was some sort of dog. I've never seen anything like it before in my life. Legs. But its back was so hunched over and how long its arms were. It looked too strange. The eyes were a really bright green, and the mouth looked like it was twisted into a snarl. Its head moved to face us for a second and then turned back towards the other way. The best way I can describe it really is the face looked more extremely distorted. Human features, but little bits of animal mixed in. It had large fangs and really big ears. We watched it for about a minute or two, and then my friend got more freaked out as I told him about it. And I know this sounds weird, but my friend is the one who wanted to leave. He was scared. I would have stayed watching it for hours if I could have, no matter how I felt about it. I don't know what it was. And we've also been coming out to this area for a couple of years now. I don't remember ever seeing anything weird around here before, except for that time I had my car broken into. But that's a different story. I don't know if what I saw was a werewolf or something that was just half man, half animal, but I think it might be worth investigating. If there is some kind of strange wildlife in the area, we should either try to learn to deal with it or maybe get rid of it. This is also not the first time I've seen something like this. In fact, a few years ago, when it turned to face me, it was this distorted human-looking face, but also looked animalistic. I don't know what it is, but I'm trying to prepare myself for more of these. I've only told this story before to a few friends, and they all think I'm making it up. I know what I saw, and it wasn't anything normal. I've never seen this thing before. I'm still learning how to process my emotions on it all. I was really scared when it happened, even though I'd try and watch it for more if I could, but now I'm just confused. I also did not find any evidence when I was out there, but I did find the tracks by cemetery. They looked and just suddenly stopped. Look, I'm probably not going to go out there again by myself. If anybody wants to volunteer and come with me, I'll be happy to go back out there and take a look. I don't know what to do, though. I'm scared by whatever I saw and am worried it might come back. I think I should maybe try and find out more about this. I want to be prepared in case there really is some kind of danger in the area. It's probably best if I know what it is. I'm just not sure what to think about it. It was definitely weird, and I don't know if I'm ready to go back there and face whatever it is that I saw. I also don't think this is something we can easily brush off. If there is some kind of strange animal hybrid in the area, this needs to be taken care of. I was hiking around Hillgard State Park here in Utah soon, so I decided to climb up an extremely steep hill to get my bearings and find my way back to the trail. When I finally reached the top of this hill, which had no trees, just rocks all around, I saw something that still gives me goosebumps when I remember what happened. A large black thing with an enormous wingspan came swooping down at me from above. My first thought was panic, then soiling myself, and then finally, oh my gosh, what is that? It made a sharp turn and flew right over me again. This thing looked exactly like a gargoyle that you would see in a horror movie. It had a long, thin snout, red eyes, and glared right at me. I was terrified and began running down the hill as fast as I could. I looked back over my shoulder and saw this gargoyle flying after me in pursuit, so I ran even faster. I finally made it back to the trail and did not stop running until I got all the way back to my car. When I got home, I did some research on gargoyles and found they are often depicted with wings. Could this have been a real-life gargoyle that I saw in Hilgard Mountain Park? If so, what was it doing there? I have so many questions and virtually no answers. If anybody has any information on this, please. I'm not sure if I can go back to that park ever again. First off, the events here took place in September of 2010. My friend, whose name is Joe, told me this story after I said I was curious about UFOs. Joe lives right outside of Salt Lake City, Utah, and works as a handyman for whatever comes his way. His father worked at Hill Air Force Base, but has recently retired. It was the middle of the night when Joe got up to use restroom, which was located. It's late fall, so it's cold out already. Anyways, he noticed something strange outside when he was heading back to bed through his window. This same window overlooks the front lawn of their home. What caught his attention was that there were these 3 bright stars that were just sitting there in the sky. He knew they weren't stars and he was curious about them, so he grabbed a coat and went outside to investigate. As he got closer, he could tell that these things were hovering just above the ground, not more than 10 feet off of it. They were round and silver, with a black center, like an eye, but they did not emit any light on them. Joe was terrified but also fascinated. He slowly approached one of them, while trying not to make too much noise. As he got close, it began to spin faster, and then shot up into the sky. In the meantime, Joe's next-door neighbor was also outside investigating these strange objects. His dog wouldn't stop going crazy, and he too walked up to a sphere and got a better look at it before it flew. He told me there was this weird feeling that came over him as he stood in front of those things. It filled him with fear, easily the size of a small airplane. The wingspan must have been at least 20 feet, if not more. Just as we got within 100 yards of it, the creature spread its wings as if to show off its immense size. And just then, it took off into the air, disappearing off in the night. It was amazing to watch it fly, as its wings generated enough lift to carry its massive body easily. We had later learned that a UFO had supposedly crashed near our town just hours prior. We couldn't help but wonder if this giant bat was connected to it. Some people are saying that this bat is actually a species of cryptid, while others say it's directly connected to the UFO. I guess we'll just have to wait and see if anybody can get a close enough look. So, there it is. That's my story. My wife and I don't really tell people about this because it was so startling and terrifying. If we try to come out and tell anybody about this, well, we'd probably get laughed at or kicked off of Facebook. He said he'd seen this creature too, and this was his story. I worked for Castle Valley, Utah, when I saw it. It was around noon on my lunch break, so the sun was high in the sky. From what I could tell, I saw what appeared to be a giant bat-like thing with big eyes and grayish skin. I only got to see it for roughly 10 seconds before it flew off over the mountains. But during that time, I got a pretty decent look at it. Just as the guy said in his other story, this thing was huge, winged, and a wingspan of over at least 20 feet. Anyway, I went back to work and one of my coworkers asked if I saw that thing too. He told me he had heard about it on the radio earlier that day, and even some theories that he had speculated about it. He thinks it's a creature. I've lived in Castle Valley my whole life. I've never seen anything like that before. So, if anybody can get close enough to possibly get some evidence, we may just finally have proof that... I was reading an article about the Bigfoot sightings, and I have something to share. I was out hiking in the Clear Creek Mountain area in Utah on July 12th. and I saw what I can only describe as a man-like flying humanoid. It was early evening, and I had just crested a ridge when I saw it hovering about 100 yards away. From what I could tell, it was roughly 6 feet tall and had a man-like body and head, but the arms were too short, and it had a large circular head with no features that It did not have any wings or propellers that I could see. It was just kind of hovering there. I was terrified and ran the other direction. I have not been able to stop thinking about it since. I can't say for sure what I saw, but it definitely wasn't anything that I've ever seen before. Do you have any idea what it could have been? Also, back in 1976, my father and I were camping and fishing in the Tushar Mountains near Beaver, Utah. We had not caught any fish, so we decided to go looking for some deeper pools where we might have better luck. We'd be perfect for some good fishing. We put our poles down. My dad was getting ready to cast when he noticed something strange about the pool. It was almost like there was steam coming off of it, but he realized it was far too cold to be steam. He kept looking at the odd cloud above the water and was about to say something when he stopped. He just stood there looking for a minute before asking me if I'd seen it too. I hadn't, so he told me to stay where I was for a while, and he went down closer to the pool. He didn't want me getting too close, because it still looked like heat was coming off the water, but he wanted to take a closer inspection. I watched him as he walked down to the pool, and then I saw it. He stopped in his tracks and began waving his arms around like he was trying to fly. I thought he was playing around, but he started yelling for me to come down there. It took me a few seconds to get my feet moving, and by the time I got down to him, he was already laying on his back. He kept telling me that it wasn't heat coming off the water, and we needed to leave right away. I had asked him what had happened, and he said something about how he had been attacked. He didn't have any visible cuts or bruising, but he was scared and began to act very sick. I helped him up. He told me something had tried to take him. I asked him what he meant, but he just explained there was something in the water. The following day, my dad, who refused to talk about what had happened, came down with a really bad fever that would not break. It got so bad that he became delirious. After taken to the hospital and he was admitted, he stayed there for roughly 3 weeks, give or take, before coming home. He never really recovered, and refused to ever talk about what had happened to him. There was something in that water that did something to him. He died about 6 months after this, apparently, the doctors were convinced that there was a rare virus he must have picked up in the mountains. I don't buy it. I think it was something paranormal, although I have nothing to back up that claim. First, some info on me. I'm a radio DJ for a station here in Utah, and I do promotional events. My fiancée works at a bank here in Salt Lake City, so I have to travel around quite a bit at weird times of the night and morning. A few months back, I was dispatched to an area outside of Providence, Utah. They wanted me there at 3 a.m. No problem. It's just a promo for a new mattress store that's opening. I get there before any of the employees and try my best not to look like somebody who's been driving all night. It didn't work. I go into the pitch-black building where the event is supposed to be held, set up my table with CDs and other swag, and sit down and wait. About 10 minutes later, a car comes screeching into the parking lot with its high beams on full blare. So bright, I have to turn my head. An older man is driving and he pulls up right next to me right away. "Hey man, you need to leave now," he says through the open passenger window. Instantly, I'm annoyed by this guy's tone of voice, especially since I've been doing nothing wrong. "Excuse me?" I say back sharply as I stand up from my chair. "Why are you telling me that?" I continue. "You're scaring off my customers," he says with disgust in his voice, as if some kind of thug or something. I'm about to say something back, but then I see them. walking slowly towards the building. Their eyes are as black as coal, are a group of 5 black-eyed kids. Instantly, all the hair on my body stands up, and I've never been so scared in my life. The older man sees them too, and starts cursing at them, telling them to go away. They don't listen, and keep coming closer. Finally, the man gets out of his car, and starts yelling at them to leave. They just keep standing there and staring at him, with those soulless, haunting eyes. Eventually, the kids turn and walk back to their car and drive away. The entire thing lasted maybe, at max, 5 minutes. I was shaken up by it, and I called my fiancée and asked her to come pick me up, even though she told me not to go because of the weird hour. I've tried to do some research online, but have not found out anything about this, except for a couple of other people who have shared similar experiences with people called black-eyed kids. What are your thoughts, opinions, or knowledge about this subject? I like to consider myself a huge fan of the outdoors. I've spent a lot of time in the backcountry, specifically at Bryce Canyon National Park in Utah State. I'm also a proud amateur photographer. Anyway, here's my story. A few weeks ago, on a beautiful, shining Sunday morning, I decided to take a drive out to the park to do some wildlife photography. While out there, I parked at one of the overlooks and began taking photos. As I was shooting, I noticed something moving in the bush below me. At first, I thought it was a deer, but as it got closer, I realized it was something else entirely. The creature was about 4 feet tall and had a very strange appearance. Its skin was a deep green color, and its head was more elongated, very similar to a snake's, actually, but it moved more like a hominid or an ape would, swinging its arms back and forth and kind of scampering on all fours. It reminded me very much the way a gorilla would move. At first, I was convinced it was reptilian of some sort, but until I saw it move. It got pretty close to me, actually, maybe 10 feet. I realized that it had very unique hands and claws with elongated, exaggerated fingers. This thing locked eyes with me for probably a good 20 seconds, and then scampered off in the direction behind where my car was parked. I kept watching. I was curious what it would do. Maybe this sounds strange or crazy, but I swear that when it ran past my car, that's when its snake-like head turned around long enough to make eye contact with me and get any white in them at all. It was very thin, small mouth, which was also closed during the entire encounter. At this point, I didn't know what to do, so I just sat there staring back at it, confused and perplexed about what I was seeing. It felt like after 30 seconds of my staring, it turned and disappeared, moving uphill, which is where most of the hiking trails are located in this area. Now, a few days later, I came up to Bryce Canyon again for more photography. Oh, and by the way, the reason I didn't end up taking any pictures of this thing is because I was in such shock. Anyway, this time on the weekday, there was practically nobody out there in these parts of the park. When I got to the spot to where I had originally seen the creature, something just seemed different about its location. There were marks on some of the trees where it had been by, I'm assuming clawing on. There were also large prints in the dirt, which I took several photos of. Now, I'm not sure what to make of all this, but it has definitely been on my mind a lot lately. Could this have been some sort of experiment? Maybe an escaped primate, reptilian genetic experiment? Or is it possible I just saw something out of my imagination? I've never seen anything like this before and would love to know what others think. Okay, last email, I swear. My father actually just told me this. But when he was 16, back in 1969, he lived on the outskirts of Springville, Utah. One night, he and his buddies were out partying with some girls of them. They all decided to go back to my grandfather's ranch house just outside town to continue drinking beer. While driving down this old dirt road, They saw what appeared to be like a large ape-like creature that ran parallel with their car. It ducked into some thicket right by the side of the road. So before it did that, their view of this thing was pretty good for about 10 seconds before it finally vanished into another group of thicket and trees on a different side of the road. My father and his friends all talked about it the next day and tried to come up with some sort of rational explanation for what they saw. They could not think of anything. Now, all these years later, he's telling me this story and we're both still trying to figure out what it could have been. I believe it was a Bigfoot. I don't think it was the same creature. When I explained to him what I saw, he explained the creature he saw was much different. It looked like your typical Patty Bigfoot, the kind of Bigfoot that's commonly depicted in all modern pop culture. What I saw was much more slender and reptilian-looking, although the way it moved was very like a gorilla. We're not sure what we could have seen. Maybe, just maybe, this was something beyond our wildest dreams and comprehension. Or maybe this whole thing is merely a coincidence and I didn't see anything. I'll leave that up to you. I served in the United States Armed Forces during Operation Enduring Freedom. I have fought overseas and have gone through many battles. I know for a fact that I was prepared to do whatever it takes to defend myself and my country. I am a proud retired veteran of the U.S. Army, and I stand behind my words. Now, the Zion Narrows hike from the Chamberlain's Ranch is an amazing hike through a beautiful slot canyon with 2 large waterfalls at the end. But before we ever went camping, I did a lot of research about Zion National Park and never saw anything that would support the existence of Bigfoot. However, I found out later from other hikers in the area that there have been reports going back to at least the 1970s. We were staying one of the main trails running through the park, but our campsite was hidden away from view by some vegetation. That's why we had heard no sounds coming from nearby hikers or campers, and probably why we were able to sneak up on this thing, undetected, until it was less than 8 yards away. Our own safety. She still works for the Utah school system, and I'm worried that somebody might find out about what she saw. She also is not crazy about the fact that I'm speaking to you and writing this down. She's the type that wants to forget about this altogether, but you know how things are. Also, my camcorder battery died right before we saw it. But if I had known this was going to happen, I definitely would have kept it charged longer before heading out on our hike. This had all led up to our camping trip in Zion National Park back in May of last year, 2011. My wife and I had just finished up our second day's hike when we came upon this creature about 10 yards away from us, standing next to some downed trees along the creek. If it were human, it would have been 6 feet tall, but very slender, long arms that hung down to its knees, very pale bluish white coloring with an almost translucent quality to its skin. No hair at all on its body. The head was with almost a shimmering quality to them, almost metallic in appearance. And I knew this was not a human we were looking at. I can't remember if it was glowing or not, but at one point, it reached up to grab the branch of tree that was hanging right above its head, and I could see through the arm. Just before grabbing the branch, there was even some kind of silvery sheen along its outstretched arm, like an optical trick. Then, it jumped to the branch, which was about 12 feet up. My wife said it had a surprised look on its face, and I could swear it got brighter for just a moment before she saw it. We were both just totally shocked by what we were seeing. It just stood there on the branch, looking at us. I remember thinking that if it wanted to, it could have easily come down, killing us both right then and there. I should also mention that just before we saw the creature, my wife and I were talking about how odd it was that we had not seen any wildlife at all during our hike. Like something was off and all nature knew. We had been hearing frogs and crickets up until that point, but they suddenly stopped. It was as if this creature had scared everything else away. Now, since that time, we've pretty much been confined to our home. We're both too afraid to go outside at night. And even during the day, we try to keep a close eye on our surroundings and the woods. I'm sure you can understand how this has affected our lives. The face was definitely not human. It had a very elongated chin and a pronounced brow ridge. The eyes were large and almond-shaped, with black pupils set against the shimmering silver irises. I remember thinking that it looked something out of a science fiction movie, something you would see on Stargate, or maybe Star Trek. As for this creature, it was maybe 6 feet tall and very slender. Like I said, long arms that hung down to its knees. The skin was a bluish-white color, looking almost albino or ghost-like, with a translucent quality. I saw no discernible ears or any hair on the body, and it definitely did not look human, although it did look humanoid. And I'll never forget how this thing moved. No wasted movements at all, almost gliding from one spot to another, smooth and deliberate in its actions. There was also a surprising gracefulness to its movements, like a professional dancer instead of a lumbering giant. This thing could have easily outrun me if it wanted. This happened to me when I was a child. While I have no real memory of it, my parents swear that it's true. The story dates back to when I was 4 years old. We lived in our old home in Idaho, and during that time, I had an imaginary friend. Well, I apparently had many, but I had grown, in the words of my parents, closer to one more than the others. The friend wasn't really a human, but more like the big bad wolf who wanted to eat the Little Red Riding Hood. I called him Jack. I talked about Jack all day to my parents, about how strong and tall he was, and how I wanted to grow up like him, but only played with him at night after everybody else had gone off to sleep. I played with him all throughout the night, and had a lot of difficulty getting up for school. Due to a lack of sleep, I ended up taking naps between lessons and grew very irritable. Naturally, it called for a few times out and regular scolding from my father, who threatened to take away my TV privileges if I failed to clean up my act. However, I did not listen. I continued to stay up late and got punished for it. My TV privileges were revoked, and I had been given a strict lights-out time for 7 p.m., which is criminally early. A few days after that, left, and so did my sleeping issues. My parents figured that it would have been a way for me telling me that I wouldn't play at night anymore, so they were happy. I could see TV again, so I was happy too. When I was 6, my father got a promotion, and we had to move to Ohio. On our moving day, most of our stuff, including the beds, had gone. All that remained were a few things in my room, which were supposed to go with us. That night, everybody slept in my room because we only had one king-sized mattress. Jack came back that night. Around 2 a.m., Dad was woken up by my laughter. I was talking to Jack. He got up to reprimand me, but then he saw Jack, outside the sliding glass door of my room, standing 9 feet tall, an ape-like creature with sharp claws and a wolfish face. It moving its arms in a rhythmic, weird to and from fashion. My father screamed, which woke my mother up. She saw Jack and also screamed. Dad picked me up in one arm, held my mom's hand in the other, and ran to their old bedroom, where he used to keep his guns. I had started crying, saying that Jack was a friend, and they were being very rude. Dad locked us in the room, gone out with his shotgun, but he had returned for a few moments later, saying this creature was gone. It had not left any footprints, even though it should have, considering its gigantic size. None of us could sleep that night, and throughout the night, my mother held me tightly and sobbed uncontrollably. We moved the next day, and I never really talked about Jack again. I was forbidden to play with him by my father, and instructed to wake them up if he ever came back. But he never did. Occasionally, I admitted missing him, but soon forgot about it. I still look back and wonder how I have virtually no memory of this ever happening. But then again, how many of us listening to this have memories back to when we were about 5 years old? Even myself are very faint. This happened to me when I was visiting my family in Massachusetts. Back in 2006, I guess. I'm not really sure of the year, but it was at least 15 years ago. So probably right around that time frame. I was at my grandmother's house near West Bridgewater. The neighborhood as my grandparents live in is pretty sparsely populated, and their backyard is quite versed on either side of the street are. I never liked visiting their house. It's not that I did not love my grandparents, which I did very much, but the woods creeped me out, especially those woods. Throughout my childhood, I slept in their room in the attic, which had a huge window directly beside my bed, overlooking the woods. The trees by themselves were so thick, they could hide a lot of potential horrors going on in there. But sometimes I did see things that I believe should not have existed. On multiple occasions, I could see unexplained lights and hear sounds coming from the trees. I always ignored them though. One time, I had heard somebody knock on my window in the middle of the night. This made me cry in fear and wake up the entire house. We put a curtain on the window after that. Now, I had nearly gotten used to the constant state of fear that I lived in whenever we went there for vacations. But the incident I'm about to tell you stands out from all other experiences. We had dinner, watched TV, and I went to my room near 9 p.m. I was not able to sleep until very that night for some reason. I guess I was reading or doing some other activity due to the sheer amount of paranormal crap that went on in there, and involuntarily glanced at the clock. It was a little past 2 a.m. I obviously know it wasn't a dream, but this makes me sure. Anyway, despite the fear, I wanted to check outside for people or ghosts. Fear of the known is always better than fear of the unknown, at least for me. I moved the curtain to take a peek, but everything was black. I don't mean black like a moonless night, but black like a coating of paint. I could not see anything outside, and I wanted to open the window to clear my confusion, but I was too scared. The sound came again. It was kind of a short, low hum and a high pitch. I know that doesn't make much sense, but burying myself in my blanket. Then, there was a loud crashing noise, and then the sound of shattered glass. I had already been jumping due to the noise, and this made me fall out of my bed, onto some shards of broken glass. I cried in pain, looked at the window. The curtain was half outside, and all the glass in my window was gone. It wasn't all in my room, but about 95% of it was outside. It most always as if the glass had been broken by somebody on the inside, from my room. As I spun my head, and my back hurt from the impact, I rushed to the window, something over it. It was a bird or a bat, or some similar creature with a wingspan of at least 30 to 40 right then into my room. He had been woken up by the noise. Pretty much everyone had been, but he came first. I pointed my finger out the window, and by the time he could see what I was referring to, the bird was barely visible. However, he did see it. I know that, because he believed my story. Well, I have no memory of the aftermath. I was given another room for the rest as well as our other stays, and nothing significant happened after that. Grandfather passed away in 2008. Grandma moved to Texas to stay closer to my uncle, so I never went there after that anyway. The obvious conclusion is that the creature had been sitting near the window, shattered the glass. That is obvious explanation, but it doesn't make it any less scary. The largest bat known today is a monstrosity, and it's only about a sixth of the creature I saw. It really changed my relationship with the state of Massachusetts altogether, and I avoid it as much as I can, even today. Okay, so I've never really believed in urban legends or cryptids or anything like that, really. I consider myself a pretty practical person, and I could say without embarrassment that imagination... Let me explain. I used to work a graveyard shift on the other side of town. One night, or maybe I should say morning, I was heading home on my usual route. I like to use a long road surrounded by lots of woodland. I drive through between 3 and 4 a.m. Besides deer and the occasional skunk, there's nothing really to worry about on that road. Or so I thought. Now, that night, I was admittedly way more tired than usual. My mother had been visiting, which threw my sleep schedule into disarray. I did manage to get a bit of time off, but I still had to work a couple of days. That particular night was my first back to work, after picking up my mother from the airport and running around town, spending time together and catching up. I was exhausted. Happy, but exhausted. Maybe I was nodding off a little, but I don't really think it was too severe. I had the radio on fairly high in an effort to keep myself awake, and I do mean odd. It was the briefest flash of what looked like something big and white. I was confused. I double-glanced at the side view mirror, and then checked my rearview mirror. I thought maybe it was another car that I had not noticed. But even as I was thinking this, I thought it a bit strange that I did not notice another car behind me sooner. And in fact, there was not another car. Feeling more confused, I was willing to dismiss it as a trick of the light, from my headlights or the moonlight or something. I kept driving, feeling a little weirded out, and then something hit the side of the car on the driver's side. Not a heavy hit, but enough to be heard. Like a big animal had bumped into the passenger side door, but by that point, I knew I was not imagining things. I don't imagine things. Twice is not a coincidence. Freaked out. You might wonder why I was so worked up if I'm not superstitious. Well, it's because I knew that the two incidents did not make sense with any logical explanations. It couldn't have been a deer. I was driving way too fast, and deer aren't all white either. So now, I'm sitting there, scanning my surroundings pretty hard, and I remember sitting up and leaning forward in my seat. That's when I caught another split-second glimpse of movement in the rearview mirror. And what I caught, sight, it made my heart leap up into my throat. Whatever it was flying. It had huge wings, as big or bigger than my car. The color of the thing was kind of ashy off-white, like a moth. That I remember pretty clearly. What gets a bit fuzzy, though, is the thing's face. The thing was visible for the briefest second in the rearview mirror before it disappeared. And I was so overwhelmed, I didn't really focus on any specific details of its appearance. But when I try to remember the face, I think of these two big black eyes and two long narrow ears. Honestly, I describe it as sort of a goblin. I swerved a bit on the road in a knee-jerk reaction. But with that thing no longer visible, I pressed hard on the gas, speeding straight down the road. My eyes were wide and my heart thumping. I remember clenching the steering wheel so hard, my left hand was cramping. I wanted to lower the radio, which was loudly playing advertisements, so that I could listen for any noise. I could not bring myself to let go of the steering wheel, like it was waiting for me to take a hand off the wheel so it could strike. Obviously frozen stiff, but my eyes kept wildly darting between the mirrors and the road in front of me. I was waiting for something, anything, but nothing happened. It was just gone. And before I knew it, I was pulling into the residential streets. Only then did I find and finally slow down. I felt marginally safer with the houses lining the streets instead of trees, and I half expected that thing to swoop down. It never reappeared. Everybody always says that I probably nodded off and had a lucid nightmare or something. And I get that. Believe me, I get it. I would have said the same. Would have dismissed it as somebody's tired brain playing tricks on them. But I want to remind you that my brain has never been creative enough to play tricks on me, no matter how exhausted or panicked. I'm the last person to imagine such a thing. And I discovered on the internet that maybe others have experienced similar things like I did. The closest... So, I'm here to share an encounter with a creature that most of you probably know. It's called the Skinwalker. Now, I personally love paranormal stuff, especially things that have to do with ghosts or spirits. Just the thought of roaming the world after you die, or haunting a certain place because of a grudge, really just tickles my imaginations. This encounter happened when I was in Illinois with my mother and her boyfriend at the time. I would eventually move to Alaska to live with my father and his new family when I turned 20. Anyway, one day, I went to a friend's house and found out that there was a sighting of a ghost in an abandoned house just outside of their subdivision. I love paranormal stuffs, right? So I couldn't help but sit down and agreed to explore this abandoned house with me. We scheduled it and planned to go there the following day. It was Saturday, the next day. We went to check the place at around 4 p.m. and planned to explore at until around 6, or just before nightfall, since he had to get back before it became dark. The house was in a secluded area, surrounded by thick trees, and it was quite far, like 40 minutes if we walked, but we got there in like 12, because we rode on a motorbike, just me and my friend. The road was bumpy. It was a dirt path, and we were getting close. I could see the house. There was a dilapidated wall covering the house. It wasn't that tall, just about 6 feet. As we got closer, I could feel this adrenaline coursing in my body like that time. That was what I was hoping for, but we didn't even make it past the gate when something supernatural happened. The tree outside the gate suddenly rustled. Not just a single branch, but the whole tree was shaking. My friend immediately stopped his bike as we watched in shock. I could not explain the feeling. It's like my body wanted to move, but could not. We were stunned, to be honest. Then we heard this hooting sound like that of an owl, but deeper and huskier. It woke us up. We were hearing it. My friend immediately tried to turn his bike around, but lost his balance, tumbled, and fell from the bike. We panicked, turned around, jumped, and swerved to the side as we hurriedly rode back. I looked back and saw a long grayish feet dropping from the tree, and then a humanoid thing appeared. It was hanging there with one hand like a monkey, and then it appeared naked and also hunchback. It produced this... I honestly thought it would chase us until it got to us, but it stopped midway, just stared before it turned back. My friend and I spoke about the encounter and never went back again. We all thought, or if it was trying to eat us or kill us or being territorial. This is only an assumption. I've read a few encounters with a skinwalker and observed various different behaviors. One thing they have in common, though, is they will attack if they get the chance, or hex you if they can. For the past few nights, I would always hear these flaps of wings right outside my apartment house. It would appear right around 1 a.m. and would come and go. I live near Cheat Lake in West Virginia. I just moved in a few months ago. I love the place, I do, and the people. I also got a job here, which is why I moved here in the first place. Anyway, everything was going great when a few weeks ago, I suddenly started hearing flaps of wings outside. At first, I heard it when it was my day off and I was staying up late. I thought it might be nocturnal birds, but the sound was quite loud, to be honest. It immediately disappeared as fast as it had appeared, so I forgot the incident the very next day. But when I had heard the sound again, I looked out the window. Didn't see anything. The next day, I waited for it to appear, and I was ready. I heard the sound, went outside. I came out the back door and looked up, but didn't see anything. It puzzled me then because where could it be coming from? I didn't manage to find it at the end because it disappeared immediately. The very next day at morning, I walked around the house and looked for something that could have made the noise. When I didn't find anything, I went upstairs, or footprints up on the roof. Human-like footprints. There were mud tracks on the flat surface of my roof. I couldn't see it before when I was on the ground, but now I know this is where the real culprit would hang out. I waited the next night, till about 1 a.m., and when I heard the sound, I ran outside, shining my light on the roof when I saw it. It was a humanoid creature, with glowing big red eyes and 4 arms. It was covered in fur, and its back, there were these fleshy wings like that of a bat. When my light shone on it, it snarled at me and crouched down. I ran like hell inside my house, locking everything, barricading the doors with some shelves, but I did not take any chances and stayed inside my bathroom until I fell asleep, waking up once every few minutes, looking at the door with a pounding heart. I honestly thought that thing would come back the very next day, so I invited a few friends over, told them what I saw, but the thing never came back again. The snow had covered everything, and you can kind of see far away, even though the sky was cloudy. There was nobody outside, and the smoke was coming out of every chimney in the neighborhood. Christmas spirit had already fully settled in. The locals had put in a lot of effort this year to make every corner of our little cul-de-sac as vibrant and inviting as possible. It was my whole family's favorite time of year. My whole family had gathered in our childhood home. My brother and sister flew back home from college for the break. We were spending Christmas and New Year's Eve together. All 5 of us, our parents and us. And I realized that I forgot my phone charger in the car. It was around midnight. I had walked out of the house and onto the driveway to get my phone charger for my car. It was freezing out, but it was also very calming. I walked out in slipper. I was close enough to the street that I could clearly see strangely, and so the snow-covered prints were there. This got me curious, so I grabbed my charger, heading back inside. I decided to inspect the strange prints outside. I wasn't very sleepy. For a moment, I thought I might have imagined them, but no. They were real and very big. They were shaped exactly like bird footprints, but they were far too big to be any bird that lived in these parts. These prints were much bigger than my hand when I stretched my fingers out wide on wearing it out. However, this didn't make sense. It did not look like somebody had walked down the street in bird feet-shaped shoes. It was a pair of prints pointing towards our house, like somebody who was standing there and facing our house, and no other prints anywhere around it. I knew I wouldn't be able to see any prints on the road, but I saw that the pavement on the other side of the road had no prints whatsoever. I stood there for about a good 3 minutes or so, waiting if I would see or hear anything, but there was nothing. It was dead silent. I decided that it must have been neighbors' kids. They loved pulling pranks on everybody in our street, and that was it. As I turned back to walk in the house, I heard something that sounded like the flapping of wings, but it was loud, or at least it sounded to me like it was much louder than it was in the night. So quiet and still. I looked around, up towards the rooftops when I saw it, and I knew the prints belonged to that thing because it was big. Active. All I could see were legs and wings. It looked like a 5-foot-tall bat, except its legs looked far more human-like and were pretty long, mind you. This thing quickly convinced me that I should be scared for myself, and not anyone else, because it turned towards me and growled. I could not force myself to say anything or to move. I felt like the snow around me had started to freeze. I have no idea what was there, or how to describe its face. Its head wasn't very big, and it was up, on that roof, so I could see it clearly. I think it was intelligent enough to know that it was not a good place to attack me, because other people were in close enough proximity they would probably come out to help me. All I know is that it was not happy that I saw it. It jumped off the roof and flew away. I was still in shock as I 6-foot-wide wings, disappearing into the black night. Out of my view, after it was gone, I went back into my house, nearly stumbling a few times. I could not keep my eyes on the driveway, and was constantly looking around me, personally again, but ever since, I've been obsessed with reading stories like this. I became affirmed. I used to be a skeptic until about 5 years ago. I shared this story with my family the morning that it happened. My mother and siblings did not believe me, and I still think they don't. But my father did. If you are interested. I have had this irrational fear of the dark ever since I was a little boy. There is something that makes me feel uneasy when I am unable to see around me. My mind gets creative and I imagine all sorts of horrible things that could happen. I'm not a kid anymore, but that fear stuck with me. Only one person knows about that, and that is my best friend. That fear is the main reason I avoid staying alone in the house and activities, such as a midnight strolls or camping. Every time my friends or family plan something like that, I make up this excuse not to show up. I never joined them until this last summer, did it over the night, camping outdoors in the forest, and since 21sts are pretty big deals, I simply could not avoid it. For the whole week before the trip, I felt anxious, daydreaming, and 5 of us were packed up in a car, making our way to the nearest forest somewhere in the afternoon. As I said, it was summer, and the sun was still very high and the weather was extremely hot and dry. My only consolation was that the nights are extremely short during that period. He said. The forest got thicker and thicker the further we walked. We had very little difficult time finding a spot with no branches over our heads to place the tents. When we finally did settle, the first few hours went by quickly, and I even felt a bit more relaxed. We were drinking, playing games, and I genuinely enjoyed the day. The sun was slowly setting, and we began working on the campfire to keep the area lit and to chase away pesky insects. I had a few more beers than I should have, and felt a little tipsy at this point. I had to use the bathroom. I walked behind the nearest tree and went just a little further so I could be bigger and bigger until it swallowed me whole. I tried to finish my business as soon as possible and head back. But when I turned around, I could not see anything or hear my friends. I found myself in pitch black darkness, and it felt like I was in the void. That feeling of light in the distance. For a second, I felt relieved and calmed down a bit. That feeling did not last long. As I came close to the fire, I slowly realized that what I'm looking at is not the campfire that was made. I was walking toward a huge bonfire that was even taller than I. As soon as I noticed this, I froze in place, unable to believe my own 2 eyes. I noticed something white inside and around the fire that was definitely not wood. Quickly realizing, I'm looking at a pile of bones. Human bones, to be precise. My body simply wasn't able to function. I could not move or run. I stood there, staring at the fire and the bones. And then I saw shadows emerging from the trees on the opposite side of the bonfire. It was walking slowly and silently, closer and closer to the fire and me. When it got close enough it looked like a man with a black hood, but his face looked awful and completely disfigured. He wore many scars and stitches on his skin, and his left eye was missing. It felt horrible just to look at him. He was over 7 feet tall, with long, slender arms, and he was holding something in his hands. It was a human leg. I almost vomited when I saw the blood dripping down the toes. The man was holding a leg that looked like it was torn off from a body near the knee, and it looked fresh, as in it happened very recently. He brought the leg close to the face and smelt it with anticipation. He opened his mouth and revealed these huge, sharp teeth. They did not look human at all. His jaw and teeth were more similar to that of a jaguar. His teeth sunk into the bloody human leg, and the sound of him tearing and chewing the flesh made me even more sick. I finally found the courage to move. I slowly backed up into the deep, dark forest, step by step, making sure I don't make a sound. When I felt like I was far enough, I turned around, started going as fast as possible. I had no idea if I was walking towards our camp or not, but the only thing I cared about was getting away as farther away from there as possible. After what felt like an eternity of walking behind the trees, I see a tiny light in the darkness. This time, it was our campfire. I finally felt safe again. All of my friends were asleep, probably passed out from the alcohol, so I woke up my best friend, got him to keep me company until dawn. I couldn't wake them all up and make them leave. They would have never believed my story, so I had no other choice but to wait for morning time. Luckily, my best friend knew how I feel, so he did not mind sitting with me in the darkness. After that day, I'm definitely never going camping again. Before I share this story, I want to make something very, very clear. I'm a pretty big guy. I work out 5 times a week, and I pay a lot of attention to my physique. I'm also pretty fast, even despite my size. I don't get scared easily and feel like physically I have the upper hand in most situations. I think it's important that you all know this, just so you can understand what happened a little bit better. I'm also Swedish, born and raised here. I've left the country for a couple of days at most, but I mostly travel around Sweden, and I feel like after all these years, I still have not discovered every part of it. I love Sweden. The people are nice, and the living conditions are great. It also has a lot to offer, and a lot of beautiful nature. And maybe, to your surprise, I actually really enjoy the climate here. I'll choose the cold over a warm climate always. I go hiking and camping pretty frequently, and I always leave my phone behind, and I always go by myself. It might sound incredibly stupid, yeah, but it has been a way for me to challenge myself. I barely use my phone anyway, so I've never had an issue for me to live without it. All I take with me is camping gear, food, and a map. And my car, of course. I try not to go to too many places, at least the same places. I'd rather discover something new. I'm 22, by the way, still living with my parents. I'm trying to finish my university degree. My mother never liked me going places by myself, not without a way to contact anybody in case of an emergency. But I just didn't listen to her. Something I would regret when I went camping the last time. The last time I went camping was in April last year. It was perfect weather for me at the time. So, I decided to go away for about 4 days. Alone again, of course. I was really looking forward to that camping trip. It had been a while since I went out on that one before, mostly because of schoolwork. It took me a couple of hours to get to the camping grounds, but I managed to do so in the late afternoon, before it got dark. This allowed me to put up my tent. There was only ever one other vehicle when I had arrived, a small van. It appeared as if they were getting ready to leave, an elderly couple. I parked my car far away from them, and giving them some privacy. I could not see the van from where I was parked, so I couldn't know whether or not they had left. At the time, I just assumed they did, and to be honest, I really didn't care. I was not planning on staying close to them anyway, and the first night was very pleasant. It was quiet. The temperature was just right, and I fell asleep, reading a book. I brought my watch, just to get some sense of time. I had been sleeping for a long time. It was noon when I had awakened. It didn't really matter, as I wasn't planning on following a schedule or anything. I was just as surprised as I had a lot of trouble sleeping. When I woke up, I noticed my tent too tired to remember though. I decided then to go for a long hike that day, deep into the forest. I had done it plenty of times, like my dad taught me. I had already been walking for hours when all I did, sit in silence and eat. It was the best part of these trips, really just taking everything in and feeling all the stress leave my body. I did some exercise and this kind of made me feel better, and I resumed my hike. This is when it started. I felt like I was being watched. I just had this eerie feeling that I was not alone anymore. So, I called out for whomever was there with me. Nobody answered. As I mentioned before, I do not get scared easily, but I felt very uncomfortable. I decided to just ignore it, convincing myself that whoever was there, I would be able to handle it if there was a confrontation. I could not shake the feeling for the rest of the hike. When I wasn't tired at all. I was in fact very alert, very aware of my surroundings. I did know that if I wanted to go hiking again the next day, I had to get some rest. I got into my tent, made sure to close at that time. I got into my sleeping bag and just looked up at the top of my tent. I could see the moon and the stars through the thin fabric, and staring at those, I was beginning to fall asleep. But then it hit me. It was an awful feeling. I was scared, and I heard a loud male voice right next to my tent. This person was super close to me. My body completely tensed up, and I could not move at all. I could barely breathe. I didn't even hear what he said, but I did hear a woman's voice, coming from in front of my tent, in front of the opening where my feet were. She said, "I think so." She was whispering. I heard the woman opening the zipper of the tent, and I don't think I've ever closed my eyes as hard as I was doing right then and there. I expected to feel somebody grabbing my feet or my legs, but there was nothing. After a couple of minutes, I opened my eyes slightly, but they completely shot open when I was looking straight into the woman's eyes. I could see that she was panicked as well. She just got up, turned around, and said, "Go, go." I then heard both of them run off fast. I was still frozen in fear and did not have the courage to run after them. I left that night. Their van wasn't there when I drove by. I have not gone camping since, and I'll never do it again. Not without my phone. Two weeks ago, my brother and I experienced something that traumatized the both of us, and get scared very easily. So just recalling this story is already making me paranoid, but I want to share it, get it out of my system. Also, I believe we're not the only ones who experienced this. 2 weeks ago, me and my brother went to Misamis Oriental in the Philippines. We traveled from Cebu City to this province to visit some relatives. Initially, we did not want to go, since we had other plans. See, I was supposed to go on a trip with my friends and my brother, and he wanted to spend his whole summer playing video games. Our parents kind of forced us to go because my uncle's birthday was near, and our parents wouldn't be able to attend the celebration because they're busy with work. So they made us go instead. We have relatives who live near Mount Balatucan, and it's not just my uncle, it's a bunch of them. It's been years since we last visited. Most of the time, they would be the one to visit us here, so there was no need for us to go, but this time, since it was summer, and we had no class and our uncle had been bedridden for 3 years, so he can't travel anymore, it just so happens to be the perfect opportunity for us to visit. That made it more unbearable. We got there right. Our relatives were excited and jolly, so it was a nice welcome. They were full of smiles and very accommodating. It was nice, but something felt off, like something was wrong. There were other people living in the area, so we passed by quite a few houses. It wasn't just me. My brother also felt it. The atmosphere in that place was kind of off, like the people who lived near our relatives were acting weird. The way they stared at us was creepy to say the least, especially the elders. They had this look that doesn't seem to welcome us. I asked around and the answer I got just made it weirder. It turns out, somebody died in the village, and the people believe that it's the case of somebody using black magic. Well, 2 days passed since, and nothing really interesting had happened. We mostly stayed inside the house, feeling homesick, and made to listen to creepy village stories told by my aunt. She was a firm believer of curses and blessings, and all the other paranormal junk. It was kind of creepy, though, how she kept talking about those things, even after we told her we don't like it. Anyway, my uncle's birthday is just the next day, and after that, we're going home. So our relatives got this idea of touring us around. Our cousins took us to swim at a lagoon. We arrived at a forest at the mountain's foot. It took about an hour of walking to get there, and we went quite deep into the forest, so the swimming was fun. After we ate lunch, me, my brother, and one of my cousins explored the area. There were no wild animals, and my cousins were familiar with the place, so it was at very least safe. After walking around for a while, my brother and me felt goosebumps. It was definitely weird since it happened to the both of us at the same time. Our cousin was not affected, though we thought maybe it was just cool, since the air was quiet, and after a while of walking, we spotted a weird tree. It was standing out from the rest. We went to go get a closer look, and saw an old tree. It was crooked, looked darker than the rest, and it had no leaves. And beside it, on the ground, there was a pentagram. 2 pentagrams, one small on the left and a bigger on the right. There were also candles, black candles, that seemed to have been used recently. There were rocks in different shapes and sizes placed around it, as if placed in order and organized. Also, there was nothing on the small one, but on the big one looked to be an animal skull, perhaps a dog or pig skull. I didn't get much of a good look. My cousin immediately dragged us back to the lagoon. After seeing this, my skin was crawling. I remember what my aunt told us about curses and black magic, so we hurried back. I noticed that my brother kept looking back. I thought that maybe he was so scared, so I grabbed his wrist, let him in, but then he screamed, grabbed onto me. I asked him what's wrong, but he just looked back at the tree as he screamed and he saw something following us. I instinctively looked and didn't see anything, but as I turned my head to look at my brother, just for a split second, I swear, I saw something black and big moving right beyond the corner of my eyesight. I immediately looked for it, but I didn't see anything. I did not get a good look at it, but I know what I saw. I might have just been paranoid at the time and was not thinking straight, but my brother told me what he saw, and it matched with the thing that I got a glimpse of. I didn't think anything anymore and dragged my brother back to the lagoon. We explained what we saw, and my other cousin immediately packed up. She packed our stuff and sent us off the very next day. Before leaving, my cousin, who went with us, told us that the tree we found was burned and the lagoon area was restricted. My cousin kept saying how lucky we are to go back to being safe. It turned out my uncle found something similar a few years ago, and that's how he became bedridden. Somewhere into the woods, buying a small parcel of land with forest behind it. I went to sleep beside my sister. It was a big slap on my shoulder that woke me up. My sister was yelling at me for playing the flute, pranks, and not letting her sleep. Sudden sleep breaks made me dizzy, and it took me a couple of seconds to realize what she was saying. She told me about hearing a flute tune that woke her up, and when she was in the bathroom, somebody thudded the door and ran away. It was bizarre. I just woke up and nobody was in the house, so I told her about and sleep when nighttime comes. He did not believe us, in the corner of the room with a blanket on her folded knees and messy hair, tears rolling down her face, and shivering out of fear. She had seen something. No, she had encountered something. Even though they were out in the middle of the woods, in complete solitude and peace and safety, there was something evil living just around their house that went inside and out, and more importantly, it wanted her. It already took my grandfather, and my grandmother was next. What were we going to do to save ourselves?